There is a scene in the third season of Regular Show where Rigby is lying in a hospital bed, eyes closed, hooked to a heart monitor, after trying to finish a diner-sized omelet in a single sitting just to get his name on a plaque. And the show, very calmly, slides his soul out of his body and into a kind of egg yolk afterlife, where a giant chicken being decides whether he gets to come back. It is one of the strangest things a cartoon has ever quietly dropped into a Tuesday time slot, and it is barely in the top 10 weirdest things this show ever did. Tonight, on Velvo, we are going through the trippiest episodes Regular Show ever aired. The ones where a small problem, a bet, a sandwich, a videotape, a chair, opens a door into something cosmic. And the show treats it like another shift at the park. So get comfortable, turn the lights down, and if you have not subscribed, it really does help us keep making these. To talk about the trippy episodes of Regular Show, you first have to talk about the trick that makes the trippy episodes possible, because the show was built from the very first scene around a very specific kind of escalation that almost no other cartoon ever fully committed to. Regular Show begins with two friends in their 20s working as groundskeepers at a public park. And on paper, that is the whole pitch. A blue jay and a raccoon, slacker temperaments, soft tempers, a vending machine boss who wants the leaves raked and the carts fueled, and the soda fridges restocked, and a small ensemble of coworkers who orbit a tiny office. By most accounts, the show grew out of a pair of student shorts that J G Quintel made at the California Institute of the Arts, including one called 2 in the AM PM and another set in a lollipop land. And from there, the premise was reshaped into something gentler, more sitcom-shaped, more domestic. But the bones never really changed. Mordecai and Rigby get a chore. They try to avoid the chore. They make a side bet, or break a small rule, or open a thing they should not have opened, and within 4 minutes, the universe begins to take it personally. That is the whole show. That is the entire engine. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Because every premise that looks small in the cold open is being quietly loaded before your eyes with the kind of stakes you would normally see in the third act of a science fiction film. You can watch the show do this in real time in an episode from the first season called Just Set Up the Chairs. The premise, said out loud, is the most boring chore in the world. Benson asks them to fold out the white plastic chairs for a small event in the park. They do not do it. They blow it off, the way they blow off everything, and the chairs sit untouched in a pile while they try to find any other way to spend an afternoon. By the end of the episode, the show has summoned a small horde of horned shadow figures who appear in the park and threaten to take their souls because the chairs were not set up in time. The show does not blink. The show does not wink at you. The chairs were not set up, so the cosmic bill came due. And what makes that episode trippy in retrospect is not the visual itself, because monsters in a cartoon are not new. What makes it trippy is the matter-of-fact tone. Mordecai and Rigby look up at the threat, sigh, and start running, because they live in a universe where this is the cost of skipping a chore, and they already know it. The show has trained you, in just a few episodes, to accept that any task at this park is a portal. The first time most viewers really feel that trickland is in another early episode called Death Punchies, where Rigby gets hold of a martial arts instructional videotape that promises to teach him an unstoppable move. The premise is that he is tired of being weak compared to Mordecai. He watches the tape, he learns the move, and once he knows it, he becomes terrifyingly, unstoppably powerful at the cost of his soul, because every punch he throws darkens his eyes a little more, until the only way to save him is for Mordecai to find the next tape in the series and learn the move that cancels it. By the end of the episode, two best friends are throwing fight-ending blows at each other in a parking lot to undo a cosmic curse caused by a bargain videotape. And again, the show is not breathless about this. It happens. The tape exists. The curse is real. The cure is also real. The next morning, the lawn still needs mowing. That is the texture of Regular Show. That is what makes its trippy episodes feel trippy, in a way that, say, a one-off acid dream sequence in another cartoon does not. Other cartoons go to the dream. Regular Show lives there and treats it as the weather. Once you understand that engine, the catalog opens up. There is an episode called The Power from the first season, where Rigby finds a small electronic keyboard at a yard sale, presses one of its buttons, and accidentally grants himself the ability to summon almost anything he wants by playing a short jingle. He summons sandwiches. He summons a hot tub. He summons a flying car. By the third act, the situation gets away from him entirely, and Mordecai has to play the same notes to undo it before the floor of reality comes apart. The cold open of that episode is a yard sale. The closing minutes are a near erasure of the world. The show does not change tone between those two ideas. The keyboard is treated, by Rigby, as a toy. It is a toy. It is also a god-tier weapon. Regular show is fine with both of those being true at once. And that doubleness, that flat refusal to choose between cartoon stakes and cosmic stakes, is what makes the Trip episodes hit the way they hit. You see the same move in episodes where Mordecai and Rigby need to climb a tall fast food tower to redeem free pizza, only for the climb to become a metaphysical trial. You see it in episodes where they need concert tickets and end up tangled in the spirit of a long-dead rock musician. You see it in an episode about a bachelor party that ends with a literal devil holding them to a blood contract. None of these are framed as special. None of these are framed as the big one. They are just episodes. They are just Tuesday. And once you understand that the show is operating on that frequency, by default, the truly strange episodes, the coma episodes, the time loop episodes, the cosmic court episodes do not feel like detours. They feel like the show finally turning its real face toward you, the face it has been hiding behind a vending machine and a golf cart this whole time. Part of what makes this work is that the cast is, very quietly, full of beings who are not what they seem. Skips, the groundskeeper who can solve any problem and lift any weight, is established quite early as not actually being an ordinary man from this century, and as the seasons unfold, he is confirmed as an immortal Yeti. Pops, the soft, child-voiced lollipop man who lives in the mansion at the top of the park, is established, much more slowly, as not actually being a man at all. Muscle Man is human. But his energy is so unnervingly committed that even the show seems unsure if he is just a guy. High Five Ghost is a ghost, in a show where ghosts are sometimes guys with desk jobs. Death is a recurring character with a British accent and a motorcycle and a wife and a son, and he appears in episodes as casually as a neighbor borrowing a hedge trimmer. None of these things are presented as twists at first. They are presented as the cast list. The Trip episodes are not violations of the show. They are the show finally raising the volume on what it has been telling you the whole time. The other thing worth saying, before we go further in, is that Regular Show was made by people who clearly loved a very specific slice of late 1980s and early 1990s pop culture, and they fed that love straight into the world of the show. The synthesizer score, the boxy old televisions, the arcade cabinets, the VH tapes, the bowling alleys, the diners, the analog cars, the wood-paneled basements, the cordless phones the size of a brick. The world of Regular Show is, on purpose, a world where the technology is just old enough to feel slightly haunted. A VH tape can teach you to kill. A keyboard can rewrite reality. A high score in a forgotten arcade game can unlock the end of the universe. A diner challenge can put you in a coma. The texture of the show is the texture of a thing you found in a garage as a kid and were not entirely sure was safe to plug in. And the Trippy episodes, almost without exception, start from one of those objects. A tape, a console, a board game, a puzzle, a keyboard, a phone, a chair, a sandwich. Something small, something analog, something with a slightly wrong vibe. And from there the floor opens up. The creator of the show, J G Quintel, came up through a generation of cartoonists trained at the California Institute of the Arts, who also gave the world Adventure Time, and a wave of related shows that were unafraid to take a goofy premise and follow it into genuinely weird territory. Regular Show, more than almost any of its siblings, picked up that thread and ran with it for 8 seasons on Cartoon Network, from its debut in 2010 to its finale in early 2017. Over that run it did, by most counts, around 244 episodes, and a feature-length film, and a handful of holiday specials, and a long arc set in literal outer space that closes the series. That is a lot of room to get weird. And the show used every inch of it. It used episodes to grieve, it used episodes to flirt, it used episodes to fight, but it kept circling back again and again to the same basic act of faith. Take a small, dumb thing. Treat it with deadly seriousness. See how far you can push it before the show breaks. The show, as it turns out, almost never broke. It just kept getting stranger, and stranger, and stranger. And the audience slowly came around to the idea that the strangeness was the point. If you want a single early episode that captures, in miniature, how the show handles cosmic premise escalation without ever feeling like it has changed gears, look for the one usually called High Score, where Mordecai and Rigby chase the top score on an old arcade cabinet of a fighting game called Broken Bones, and the cabinet itself begins to push back. They reach a level the developers never quite finished, and the glitch begins to seep out of the cabinet, into the room, into reality. By the end, they have to literally beat the broken game from inside it, or the world is going to crash like a corrupted file. Again, the cold open is two guys at a pizza place feeding quarters into a knockoff fighting machine. The closing minutes are them being absorbed into the source code of existence. And the show does not flag the difference. It does not slow down. It does not say, "This is the big one, hold on." It just keeps moving. Because in the world of this park, this is what happens. You play the wrong game, you punch through the floor of reality. You set up the chairs late, the shadows come. You learn the death punch, your eyes go black. You order the wrong sandwich, you go on trial in a court of food. You make a bet, you make a contract. You make a contract, the universe holds you to it. We are going to spend the rest of the night walking, slowly, through the strangest of these contracts. The episodes where the show stopped pretending the park was a park. The episodes where the camera left the lawn, drifted up past the trees, past the clouds, past the atmosphere, and stayed out there for a long time before remembering to come back. We are going to start with the ones that look like dreams, because that is, in many ways, the show in its purest form. Then we are going to drift into the ones that play with time, the ones that play with death, and the ones that play with the basic question of who Pops actually is. Because the answer to that question turns out to be one of the largest things a cartoon has ever attempted to put inside a half-hour slot. And by the end of the night, we will be in space, with the park itself ripped out of the ground and flung into the void, because that is, by the literal text of the show, how it chooses to end. Stay with me. There is a lot of ground to cover, and there is no hurry. The first family of Trippy regular show episodes are the dream episodes, and they are not really dream episodes. They are episodes where a character is fully conscious for the trip, even though they are also, technically, asleep, or knocked out, or astrally separated from the body that is currently lying in a hospital bed somewhere in the background. The show loves this state, in part because it is the cheapest possible way to license cosmic visuals, but mostly because it is the only state where the show can speak honestly to its characters about what they actually want. Mordecai and Rigby, awake, are constantly lying. They lie to each other, they lie to themselves, they lie to Benson, they lie to women. The only time anybody in this park gets the whole truth out is when they are somewhere they can never quite remember the shape of when they wake up. The crown jewel of this category, by general consensus and by the sheer commitment of its own absurdity, is the third season episode usually known as Excellent, where Rigby tries to complete a diner challenge that involves eating an enormous omelet in a single sitting. The challenge is presented as ordinary. There is a wall in the diner with a small number of names on it. The names of the people who have finished the omelet and earned a trucker hat with the word excellent on the front. And Rigby decides he wants his name on that wall. It is, at first, a joke episode. A small, dumb food challenge episode. The kind of plot a lesser show would resolve in a single act break and then move on. Then it turns out, Rigby is allergic to eggs, and instead of saying that out loud, he eats anyway, in front of his friends, because he wants the hat, and almost immediately he goes into a coma, and the episode tilts. What follows is some of the most committed afterlife imagery the show ever attempted. Rigby finds himself walking, alone, in an unmoored white space, and he is met by a calm, enormous chicken figure, sometimes referred to in fan circles as the Excellent Knight, who lays out the rules of a journey he has to complete to earn his way back into his body. Mordecai, meanwhile, in the waking world, refuses to leave the hospital, and the two halves of the episode begin to talk to each other. Mordecai, sleepless, slowly comes to the realization that he has never told Rigby in plain words how much he matters to him. Rigby, in the dream space, is told that the only way out is to confess the things he has been hiding. The visual language is bright and soft and slightly washed out, and the show, again, never tells you that this is the big emotional episode. It just is, because the show has trained you to take the cosmic stuff seriously. By the time Rigby returns to his body, the dream and the waking world have stitched themselves together, and the audience has watched a coma sequence in a cable cartoon turn, without warning, into a small, quiet love letter from one best friend to another. That is what the show does at its best, and that is why the Trippy episodes matter. The trip is never the point. The trip is the only place these characters can finally tell the truth. A second example, less famous but in some ways stranger, is an episode from the second season called Brain Eraser, where Rigby uses a small handheld device to wipe a single memory Mordecai keeps teasing him about. The premise of the device is presented as a magic prop, the kind of object the show drops in without explanation. Rigby uses it. He erases the memory. And then it turns out the memory does not simply disappear, it becomes a sentient thing, and it wants to come back. The episode becomes a chase, with the memory itself, embodied, pursuing the boys through the park, demanding to be returned to its home. By the third act, they are bargaining with a mind that does not have a body, on a stage that is half real and half not. It is presented as a goofy quarter hour with a sci-fi gimmick, but the underlying premise that the things you choose to forget about yourself still exist and still want to be acknowledged is the kind of premise an art film might spend 90 minutes on. The show spends 11 minutes on it, with jokes, and then lets the next episode happen. The third and probably best example of the dream as truth move comes in an episode called Yes, Dude, Yes, where Mordecai, anxious about whether to call a woman back, ends up tangled with a videotape called Yes, Dude, Yes from a video rental shop. The tape, when he plays it, begins to talk to him through the screen and tells him, calmly, that every choice he makes from this point forward should be yes, because no is what keeps him stuck. The tape is alive. The tape is also right. He starts saying yes to everything. At first it works. He gets the girl. He gets the night out. He gets the experience he was scared of. Then he keeps saying yes, and the tape starts to demand more and more, and the boundary between the world inside the tape and the world outside of it begins to dissolve. Because the tape, it turns out, was not a self-help message. The tape was a being. And the only way out of the relationship he has accidentally entered with this disembodied piece of advice is to learn to say no again. By the end, the cassette is physically attacking him in a video store. And the moral, which the show genuinely commits to, is that any system of rules you outsource your decisions to will eventually try to eat you. Again, you can read the episode as a goof. You can read it as one of the more pointed things a kid's cartoon ever said about advice culture. Both readings are valid. The show offers no preference. The reason these dream and hallucination episodes feel so unified, even though they look very different on screen, is that the show almost always lets the trip have real consequences in the waking world. A lesser version of this kind of cartoon would end the dream sequence with a beat of "Am I awake?", a wink, and a reset to status quo. Regular show is more interested in carryover. When Rigby almost dies in the diner episode, the friendship is changed. When Mordecai gets out of the tape episode, his confidence is changed. When a character gets erased, even briefly, in one of the mind wipe episodes, the absence is real, and you watch the other characters notice it. The trips are doors, and the doors open both ways. Whatever the characters carry into the dream, they bring something back. That is rare for a show of this kind. Most shows treat the surreal as a vacation. Regular show treats the surreal as a place where the truth lives, and a place that exacts a small tax on you for visiting. It is worth pausing, briefly, on the fact that the show is constantly putting Rigby into states of altered consciousness, more than any other character. Rigby is the small, angry raccoon at the center of the show, and the show seems to know in some half-conscious way that Rigby is the character who most needs to be cracked open. He is in the coma in the diner episode. He has his body invaded in the episode where he and Mordecai briefly swap bodies. He spends an entire episode shrunk down and trapped inside a video game cabinet. He becomes a giant in one episode and a baby in another. He is bitten by a skunk and slowly turned into a skunk himself. And the show does not present that as horror, it presents it as a slow, uncomfortable becoming, with all the friction of a real change. Even his major late-season arc, where he tries to get his high school diploma, turns into a journey to literal space. The show, again and again, returns to the idea that Rigby is somebody who has never told anybody, including himself, what he actually feels, and the only way the show can pry that information out of him is to put him somewhere strange. He needs to be poisoned, or shrunk, or possessed, or split into pieces before he can say one true thing about his own life. The trip episodes built around him are not, in that sense, gimmicks. They are the show finding the only door this character will walk through. Mordecai gets put through a different kind of altered state, and it is almost always about choice paralysis. He is the character who knows what he wants and refuses to act on it, so the show keeps putting him into scenarios where the act of choosing is taken away from him. The Yes Tape episode is the cleanest example. There are also stretches where his body is taken over by an outside force during a game, and he has to watch himself make decisions he would never make. There are nights where he wakes up married, in a Vegas pastiche, and has to spend the entire episode untangling a single bad choice from a fugue state. There is a recurring pattern across multiple seasons where his version of a trip is a loss of agency. He is not pulled into the cosmic to confess. He is pulled into the cosmic to be reminded that he is the one driving. Rigby trips outward into honesty. Mordecai trips outward into responsibility. That is the whole show, if you squint at it long enough. The hallucination family also contains some of the show's strangest sleep imagery proper, in episodes that are technically about dreams. There is a Halloween special segment in which Mordecai and Rigby fall asleep at a sleepover and dream into each other. And the segment commits to dream logic so completely that even the show seems unwilling to fully explain what happened by the end. There is an episode in which the entire park staff is forced to share a single nightmare because a piece of bad coffee has been brewed in the break room, and the nightmare slowly builds into a shared landscape they have to escape together. There is an episode in which Pops, who sleeps almost like a baby through most of the series, has a nightmare so unsettling that the show pulls back from showing it to you directly and only lets you see it through reflections and shadow puppetry. The recurring choice in every one of these episodes is to refuse to wink at the audience. The dreams are real. The nightmares are real. The cost of going in is real. And the strangeness of the show is partly that it took the time in a half-hour cable slot to render those interior states with the same care a horror anthology might give them. If you have only watched regular show casually, the dream episodes are the easiest entry point to its trippy side, because they are the most contained. You can put on the dinner coma episode and watch the show invent an afterlife in 11 minutes and recover. You can put on the tape episode and watch the show invent a sentient self-help guru in 11 minutes and recover. The premise is sealed off. The cosmic stays inside the episode. You can watch them like miniatures, like tiny strange paintings on a long museum wall. And then, when you are ready, you can start watching the next family of trip episodes, the ones where the cosmic refuses to stay sealed off and starts leaking into the next episode and the season after that. Those are the reality-bending episodes, and they are where the show begins to suspect that it is not really a sitcom at all. There is one last thing to say about the dream chapter of the show before we move on, and it is something the show itself does not say out loud, but consistently implies. Most of the major dream and coma sequences in regular show happen because somebody pushed themselves too hard on something that was not worth pushing for. The diner challenge is not worth a coma. The yes tape is not worth your free will. The mind wipe is not worth the embarrassment it was supposed to erase. The body swap is not worth the prank it was used for. The show, over and over, in episodes that look like throwaway sci-fi premise episodes, is making the same quiet argument. The trip will always be bigger than the reason for the trip. The price of the dream will always exceed whatever you were trying to escape. And the only way back to your body is to admit to somebody what you were really running from. That is, in the end, a more sophisticated argument than most cartoons of its era ever attempted, and it is one of the reasons the show has aged the way it has. The dream episodes are funny. The dream episodes are weird. The dream episodes are also, very quietly, the show's ethics. And once you see that, the next family of trips, the ones where reality itself begins to bend, will look less like spectacle and more like inevitability. If the dream episodes are the show trying to get inside its characters, the reality-bending episodes are the show trying to get outside of itself. They are the episodes where the universe of regular show stops behaving like a stable container for stories and starts behaving like a thing that can be rewritten, deleted, paused, glitched, rebooted, or quietly looped while nobody is looking. They are the trips where the trip is not happening to a character. It is happening to the world. And there are more of them than you might remember, scattered across every season, almost as if the show was constantly testing the floorboards to make sure it could still drop through them when it wanted to. The most famous of these, and the one a lot of fans point to as the show at its strangest, is the third season episode usually known as Fuzzy Dice, where the team gets hold of a pair of dice that can change reality based on whatever the user wishes for. The dice are presented as a kitschy little prize, the kind of thing you would hang from a rearview mirror. They roll them. They make small wishes at first. They get a snack. They get a better day off. Then they get greedy, the way the show always knows they will. And they start wishing for things that ripple. Each new wish overwrites part of the world, and they begin to forget what the original world looked like. By the climax, they are not even sure who they are. The episode flirts very openly with the idea that the previous 20-something episodes of the season might have been overwritten too. And the audience is briefly invited to wonder whether the version of the show they have been watching is even the original timeline. It is the kind of move that, in a more pretentious show, would be the season finale. Here it is, just a normal slot in the middle of a season, and then the next episode begins like nothing happened. A close cousin to that one, narratively, is the episode usually called Trash Boat, in which Rigby decides he wants to legally change his name and lands in the process of trying to outrun an embarrassing nickname on the new name Trash Boat. The catch is that the change is not just legal, it is metaphysical. As soon as he commits to the new name, the universe begins to enforce it. And the new name takes over not just paperwork, but his identity, his relationships, the way people see him, the way he sees himself. The episode then becomes a small fable about how the name you carry shapes the body you carry, and how trying to outrun the name your parents gave you can erase the version of you they actually knew. It is, again, dressed up as a goof. It looks like a one-act sitcom premise. It is also one of the more pointed things the show ever said about identity, and it is one of the cleanest examples of how the show uses reality bending as a tool for self-examination, not just spectacle. In the same family, there is an episode called Format Wars, in which a piece of obsolete media decides that the only way for it to survive is to challenge the new format to a duel, and the duel becomes a real physical battle that warps the geometry of the room they are in. There is an episode in which the same tiny errand the characters have been running every morning is revealed to be a kind of accidental ritual that has summoned something that lives in the gaps between days. There is an episode in which a game played in a basement begins to literally project its outcomes onto the world outside the basement, and the people in the basement realize that the spaces on the board are mapping, one-to-one, to streets in their town. Every one of these is structured the same way. Start small, establish the rule, let the rule eat the world. End with a quick clean reset, treat it as a moment of relief rather than as a cheat. What is interesting about the reality bending episodes, as a category, is that they tend to happen in the middle of seasons, not as season finales. A season finale on this show is much more likely to involve a relationship beat, or the end of a romance arc, or the cliffhanger of a new villain. The reality bending episodes are slotted in around them, as if the writers were quietly arguing that reality bending was the normal state of the show, and the romance was the special occasion. That is, by itself, an unusual choice. Most shows save their biggest formal swings for their biggest narrative moments. Regular show is built the other way around. It will rewrite the universe in an episode that does not move the larger story forward by an inch, and then it will spend an entire half-hour finale on whether or not Mordecai is going to talk to Margaret at the airport. The cosmic is routine. The emotional is rare. That is the proportion. That is the worldview. The show also has a recurring class of episodes that are not exactly reality bending, but live in the same neighborhood, where the laws of the show are suspended just enough to put the characters into a scenario the show would not normally allow. There is an episode in which the entire park staff competes in a lawn mowing race that ends with the lead racer crossing a finish line at the edge of the solar system. There is an episode in which a stick of butter, brought back from a particular store as a favor, turns out to be a cursed object that begins to age its handler. There is an episode in which the simple act of returning a video on time becomes a cross-country chase scored to a synth ballad. None of these episodes contain a twist in which it turns out it was all a dream. The show, on the whole, refuses the "it was all a dream" out. The lawnmower really does reach the edge of the solar system. The butter really does age its handler. The chase really happens. Time really passes. The next morning, the characters carry the consequences with them. The reality bending is, by the show's own internal rules, real. That commitment is what makes it land. It is worth talking about the visual side of these episodes, because regular show, despite its modest art style, is doing some quietly inventive things during its trippiest moments. The show is built on flat colors, simple shapes, slightly washed out skies, and a handful of repeating backgrounds. The animation is rarely showy. The character designs are deliberately plain. And then, in the cosmic moments, the show breaks from all of that. The skies tilt into deeper, richer colors. The geometry of the park starts to lean in directions geometry should not lean. Characters get drawn in styles slightly off from their normal model. The lighting goes from gentle TV daylight to something closer to a planetarium. None of this is announced. The show does not slow down to give you a montage of its formal toolkit. The shifts happen between cuts. You blink, and the room has gone soft. You blink again, and a hallway is longer than it was. The reality bending is, in part, a visual contract. And the visual contract is that you, the viewer, are also being slowly destabilized along with the characters, and that the only way out is the same as their way out. which is to keep going until somebody fixes it. What is fascinating about these episodes, from a craft standpoint, is how much they trust the audience. The show very rarely gives you a hand on the shoulder to say, hey, this is the weird part. The weird is the show. There is no fourth wall break, no winking narrator, no character looking at the camera. The trip is integrated. And because the trip is integrated, the trip lands. You cannot dismiss the diner coma episode as a special exception, because the show has spent 4 prior episodes warming you up with smaller cosmic intrusions. You cannot dismiss the dice episode as a one-off, because the next episode begins as if everybody remembers the dice as a real event. The show has a long memory for its own surrealism, and it is willing to refer back to events in earlier reality-bending episodes during apparently mundane stories in later seasons. The chairs got set up eventually, but the cosmic bill came. That is part of the world now. That is in the file. The next time a chore is skipped. The audience is aware that the floor of the universe is thinner here than it is elsewhere, and the show deliberately lets you carry that knowledge with you into every episode. There is a smaller and stranger subcategory inside the reality-bending episodes that deserves its own pause, and that is the meta episodes, the ones in which the show seems to be aware, in some half-conscious way, that it is a show. There are episodes that play with the credits, in which a character notices a name on screen and reacts to it. There are episodes that play with the title card, in which something from the previous episode is still visible behind the title card of the next one. There are episodes that play with the act break, in which a character refuses to let the show cut to a commercial. None of these moments are pushed hard. They are not gags about being a cartoon. They are more like glances at the audience from inside the frame. Momentary acknowledgments that the characters know, in some peripheral way, that they are inside a structured thing. The show is too tasteful to make a big deal of it, but the moments are there, scattered across the run. And they slot neatly into the same family as the reality-bending episodes, because they are doing the same thing, which is destabilizing the contract between the viewer and the show in tiny, deliberate ways. There is also the wider question of what the show is doing with all this, philosophically, because once you assemble the reality-bending episodes into a single playlist, a pattern emerges. The show, again and again, dramatizes the idea that the rules of the world are fragile, that the people in charge of enforcing those rules are usually bored or absent, and that any sufficiently committed pair of friends with a stupid idea can punch a hole in the membrane. That is, when you say it out loud, a quietly anarchic worldview for a cable cartoon. The show does not glorify the hole punching. The show is very clear that there are consequences, but the show takes the position, week after week, that the universe will tolerate a remarkable amount of meddling from 2 underpaid groundskeepers in their 20s, and that the people who really suffer when the rules get broken are usually the ones who broke them, and not the universe itself. The universe is more durable than it looks. The friendships are not. The show is more interested in the second half of that sentence than the first. By the time you have watched the reality-bending episodes back to back, you start to notice that the show treats the membrane between the normal and the cosmic as something more like a tide than a wall. It comes in, it goes out, it leaves things behind on the sand. Sometimes the show is fully in the cosmic, and you can feel it. Sometimes the show is fully in the domestic, and you can feel that too. Most of the time, though, it is somewhere in between, with the tide creeping a few inches up the side of the cart, and nobody quite acknowledging that the cart is going to be wet by the end of the day. That is, in a quiet way, what the show is. It is a show about people who live below a tide line that they have all silently agreed to ignore. And the trippy episodes are the days when they cannot ignore it anymore. Because the water is in the office, the water is in the kitchen, the water has started rearranging the furniture without permission, and somebody is going to have to acknowledge, on the record, that this is not normal weather. We are going to leave the reality-bending episodes here, but only because the next family of Trip episodes is even larger, and it has its own house and its own rules, and it deserves its own slow walkthrough. That family is the time episodes, the loops and the leaps and the long futures, and regular show. Despite being a cartoon about 2 slackers at a park, may have done more interesting work with the idea of time than most live-action science fiction shows of its decade. Take a slower breath. We will be here a while. The time episodes of regular show are, taken together, one of the strangest mini-canons inside any cartoon of the last 2 decades. The show came back to time, again and again, as if it could not leave it alone. There are episodes about time travel, episodes about time loops, episodes about the personification of time itself, episodes about premonitions, episodes about future selves, and episodes about whole long futures that the show then has to either honor or rewrite. The whole series, in the end, closes on a time skip. The whole series, in the middle, dangles a future at you that is so specific you can almost smell it. And the wild thing is that the show never sits you down and says, "Here is our position on time." It just keeps writing about it, the way certain novelists keep writing about certain rivers. And the cumulative effect is that you finish the run with a strong, unspoken sense that the writers, behind the scenes, were thinking about time more than they were thinking about almost anything else. The cleanest entry into this category is a second season episode, usually called It's Time, in which Rigby is told that the pocket watch he has been carrying around was a gift from a future version of Mordecai, sent back through time to be delivered to Mordecai on a specific night. Because that night is the night Mordecai will fail to do the thing he was supposed to do. The watch is the message. The wearer is the courier. The show, very calmly, establishes that the entire premise of the episode is a paradox, and then it does not bother trying to resolve the paradox. It just commits to the world in which the paradox is real and lets the characters live with it. By the end, Mordecai has done the thing, the watch has been handed back, and the loop is closed. The episode does not break to tell you it is doing time travel for the first time. The episode does not announce itself. The episode is, like everything else in this show, a Tuesday airing of a small premise that turns into a quietly impossible thing, and then resolves before the credits with the friendship intact and the universe more or less in one piece. It is not the only loop episode. There is a later episode in which the characters, on a wilderness training trip, repeatedly die in the same outdoor scenario and reset, with full memory of every previous death, until they can survive the day. The episode is structured like a video game, with the audience watching the team get smarter, more wounded, and more tired with each loop. The deaths in a children's cartoon are unflinching. They drown, they are eaten, they fall off cliffs, they get crushed by trees. The show does not look away, and the eventual escape from the loop is not, as you might expect, a clever solution from the smart character. It is a moment of plain, honest cooperation from the whole team. The loop, the show argues, is broken when the team stops competing inside it. Time, in regular show's mythology, is not a puzzle to be outsmarted. Time is a teacher, and the test is whether you can finally listen. There is another loop-adjacent episode in which a character receives a phone call from himself in the past, asking for help avoiding a mistake. The call cannot last more than a minute. The mistake cannot be named directly. The call has a hard cap. The episode is a tight, almost real-time conversation between two versions of one person. And what makes it trippy is the way the show refuses to let either version be wholly right. The past version is naive, but the future version is also wrong about some of what he thinks he is correcting. The episode ends with both versions accepting that they were always going to do most of what they did, and that the call was less a rescue and more a small comfort. That, again, is a quietly sophisticated argument to make in 11 minutes on a Cartoon Network slot. The show seems to genuinely believe that the value of a glimpse into the future is not the chance to avoid the mistake. The value is the chance to forgive yourself, in advance, for the mistake you were always going to make. The biggest time episode, in terms of pure on-screen weirdness, comes when, by most accounts, a kind of father figure of time is in trouble, and the park staff have to step into the literal mechanism of time to put it back together. Whether or not the writers always thought of the figure that way, what is on screen is one of the most unhinged stretches of visual work the show ever did. You see the inside of time as a room. You see different decades stacked physically on top of each other like dishes. You see characters from earlier episodes appearing as time slips, briefly visible inside other characters' memories. The show stretches its own model of how its universe works in ways that, in retrospect, are setting up the cosmic stuff that will pay off in the final seasons. The sequence ends, as most of the Trip episodes do, with the world more or less restored and the characters quietly tired, but you do not forget what you saw. The show has, for several minutes, put a face on time and let you look at it, and the face is calmer and stranger than the face most shows would have chosen. There is also the long, slow time work the show does without ever billing it as time work. Across all 8 seasons, you watch Mordecai try and fail and try again with Margaret. You watch their friendship turn into something more, then collapse, then quietly resurface. You watch the same characters work the same jobs for years, and you watch the small accumulating change of all those years on people who insisted, for most of their 20s, that they were not going to change. The show is patient. The show takes its time. The romance arc with Margaret stretches across seasons in a way that, if you binge it, almost feels like a separate small show running inside the cartoon. Then a second arc opens, with a different character, and the show, again, refuses to rush. Time, in regular show, is not just a sci-fi gimmick. It is the material the show is actually made of. The characters get older. The show ages with them. The trip episodes are loud about this. The romantic episodes are quiet about it. They are doing the same work. A particularly strange thing the show does, more than once, is leak its own future. There are episodes, scattered across the middle seasons, in which you briefly glimpse a version of these characters that does not seem to match the version of the show you are currently watching. You see Mordecai older. You see the park in disrepair. You see characters in unfamiliar costumes. The show, at first, presents these glimpses as throwaway gags. The kind of thing a more careful show would explain by the end of the episode. Regular show does not explain them. The glimpses pile up, season after season, and by the time the finale arrives, a lot of the future the show has been quietly showing you turns out to have been the actual future, or close enough to it that fans have long taken these moments as evidence the show was planning the ending years in advance. Whether that is true production history or a clever bit of pattern matching on the part of the audience is less important than the fact that the show, on the screen, behaved as if it knew where it was going. The trip episodes were not detours. They were dispatches. And by the time you reach the finale, you realize you are being shown the destination, in flashes, for years. Inside the time category there is also the Halloween anthology tradition the show built up over multiple seasons, in which each Halloween special would deliver 3 horror or science fiction segments tied to a frame story. A surprising number of these segments hinge on time, on loops, on premonitions, on visits from older or younger versions of the characters, or on the simple horror of being unable to escape a piece of time that keeps repeating. The Halloween specials, taken as their own subset, are some of the most concentrated trip content in the whole show. They give the writers and animators license to push harder, design stranger, color uglier, and end darker than a regular episode would tolerate. And they do all of that within the existing world of the park, with the existing voice cast, in the existing tone. The horror of the Halloween specials is rarely jump scare horror. The horror is almost always the horror of a small character caught inside a thing they cannot exit. The clock, the room, the day, the decision, the friend who is not really their friend anymore. The trip is the trap, and the trap is, very often, time. Then there is the episode that may be the single most cosmic timepiece the show ever put on the air, and it is one of the rare instances of the show going fully cosmic with full self-awareness. In one late season episode, a small choice in the park leads, through a chain of events, to a long, contemplative stretch in which the characters glimpse what looks, to most viewers, like the heat death of the universe, or at least a long, peaceful, fading version of it. The show does not flinch from the stillness. There is no music for long stretches. The characters do not crack jokes. They sit with it. They look at each other across the kind of cosmic distance you do not usually see in a children's cartoon. And then, when the camera comes back to the park, the world is intact and the moment is unspoken. But you, the viewer, are different. You have seen the show admit, with no fanfare, that everything it loves is finite. That is, in a cable cartoon, an almost unheard of moment. And the show treats it as a Wednesday. The reason all of this matters, in the context of the trippiest episodes, is that time is the spine of the show's surrealism. Every trippy episode is, at heart, a small disturbance in the way time is moving for the people inside it. The dream episodes are a slowdown. The reality-bending episodes are a glitch. The loop episodes are a stutter. The future episodes are a fast-forward. The cosmic episodes are a zoom-out so far you can see the whole reel. You can describe almost every weird regular show episode as a manipulation of the speed or shape of time. And the show seems to know this, because it returns to time so constantly that the return cannot be accidental. The writers were thinking about it. The directors were thinking about it. The composers were thinking about it. The voice actors, at moments, are clearly thinking about it. The whole show was, on some level, a long, quiet meditation on what time does to a friendship that you accidentally let outlast your 20s. It is worth saying, because the show says it more than once, that the dread inside the time episodes is rarely about death. The dread is about waste. The watch in the early time episode is not warning Mordecai that he will die if he does not act. The watch is warning him that he will spend the rest of his life wishing he had acted. The loops in the loop episodes are not about being killed. They are about being stuck in a version of yourself you no longer want to be. The cosmic episodes are not warnings of apocalypse. They are reminders of finiteness. The show, in a quiet, persistent way, keeps making the same argument to the audience. The thing to be afraid of is not the end. The thing to be afraid of is the years you spent pretending you had more time to start than you actually had. That is a heavy thing to say in a half-hour cartoon. The show says it very gently, again and again. By the end of the run, when the finale arrives and the show finally executes the largest time leap it has ever attempted, you realize that all of the Trip episodes about time were rehearsals. The show had been preparing the audience, episode by episode, for the moment when it would be willing to let years pass in a few minutes. It had been training you to accept that the bodies of the characters can change, that the wardrobes can change, that the relationships can ossify into something else, and that you, as a viewer, are not allowed to insist on the version of the cast you first met. Time will do what time does. The Trip is the experience of being shown that. And when the show finally pulls the trigger on the leap in the finale, it lands harder than almost any animated finale of its decade, because the show has been writing checks against this particular emotional account for almost 8 years. And now it is finally cashing them. We will get to the finale in its own chapter, with the room appropriately quiet. For now, just sit with the fact that the show was always secretly about time, and that the trippiest episodes were always secretly about that. It is hard to overstate how comfortable regular show is with death, in a way that almost no other comparable cartoon of its decade was willing to be. The show treats death less as a horror and more as a neighbor. There is a recurring character literally named Death, voiced with a calm, slightly dry edge, who lives somewhere in the same metaphysical neighborhood as the park, and shows up to handle business when business needs handling. He is not a villain. He is not a metaphor. He is, by the literal text of the show, the personification of the end, and he has a wife, and a child, and a motorcycle, and a strong opinion about wagers, and he can be invited to a barbecue. The first time he appears, the show treats his arrival as a moderate inconvenience, and then proceeds to play him in subsequent episodes the way a sitcom would play a recurring uncle. That, by itself, is one of the show's strangest, calmest acts of world building. The trippiest of the death episodes is usually the one in which a friend of the staff is approaching the end of his contract with the world, and the team challenges Death directly to a contest to extend the deadline. The contest is allowed, the challenge is honored, the rules are followed. The show, completely seriously, lets you watch a small group of underpaid groundskeepers bargain with the Reaper, on terms that the Reaper himself agrees are fair. And you watch the bargain hold. There is no moralizing. There is no twist in which the bargain is undone in the third act. The bargain is real. The death is delayed. The friend lives a little longer. And the show then files Death back into the cast as a recurring figure who can be called on in future episodes when his particular brand of expertise is needed. That is, when you say it out loud, an unusual posture for a cartoon to hold. Most shows would either keep Death distant and abstract, or use it once for a big special and never bring it back. Regular show treats Death as a coworker. The trip is not that Death exists in the universe of the show. The trip is that Death has a parking spot. There are smaller Death-adjacent trips throughout the run. There is an episode in which a character orders a sandwich so dangerous, it puts him on trial in a cosmic court of food, and the court is presided over by a long table of legendary chefs and judged by what is, essentially, the platonic ideal of every sandwich ever eaten. The episode is comedic on its surface, but it is also, structurally, a near-death experience episode. The character is on trial for his life. The verdict will be enforced. The world of the court is a real place, with its own rules, its own dress code, its own history, and its own willingness to enforce sentences that bleed back into the waking world. The character survives. He gets out. The next morning, the kitchen is a kitchen again. But you have, briefly, been shown a place where food is judged by gods. And once you have seen it, you cannot fully eat a sandwich the same way again. There are episodes in which a character has, for technical reasons, only a short time to live, and the show plays the countdown straight. There is an episode about a last meal that turns out to be a portal of its own. There is an episode in which a beloved object is being scrapped, and the team holds a small wake for it. And the wake itself slips, gently, into a state where the line between the object and the person remembering the object becomes unstable. There is an episode in which Pops, who is not quite a person, comes very close to ending himself out of cosmic loneliness, and the staff has to spend a quiet evening simply sitting with him until the feeling passes. That last episode, in particular, is one of the most underrated moments in the show. It does not have a high concept. It does not have a sci-fi gimmick. It is, on the page, just a long, quiet sit with a friend who is in pain. But it is, in the context of a show that is constantly punching through reality, a deliberate use of the show's surrealism to stage a real conversation about despair. The surreal is there. The party is happening upstairs. The team has agreed to keep it that way until the friend is ready. And the show, with no flagging, lets you watch. The death episodes also become, over time, a kind of unofficial commentary on the show's idea of friendship, because almost every death episode is built around the principle that nobody on this team gets to leave alone. The team will go into the afterlife to retrieve a member. The team will bargain with the Reaper to keep a member. The team will stay up all night sitting on a porch with a member who is unsure he wants to keep going. The unspoken rule of the park is that no one is allowed to go quietly. That is, in a children's cartoon, a remarkably tender thing to commit to. It is also, when you look at the Trip episodes alongside it, a quietly powerful piece of moral architecture. The Trip episodes give the show permission to make the danger real. The friendship rules give the show permission to make the rescue real. The two systems work together. You believe in the danger because the show has spent years showing you that the danger can be enforced. You believe in the rescue because the show has spent years showing you that the friendship will always come. You also see, woven through the death episodes, a recurring image that is one of the show's most haunting motifs, which is the long staircase. Different episodes use it differently. Sometimes it is literal, a staircase climbing out of a tunnel into a sky. Sometimes it is metaphorical, a slow climb through a memory. Sometimes it is hidden, a quietly long stretch of a hallway that the show holds on for a beat too long. The staircase, when it appears, is almost always at the threshold between the waking world and the next one. Characters climb it, or refuse to climb it, or sit on it. Almost no other show would commit to the same visual repeatedly across years, but regular show keeps coming back to the staircase. It is, in a quiet way, the show telling you that it has a model of what happens at the end, and the model involves a long climb, and the climb is something you can choose to begin or refuse, and the climb can be paused so that the people you love can catch up. It would be wrong to talk about the death and afterlife episodes without mentioning the way the show uses cosmic courts, of which there are several. The food court episode is one. There is a similar episode set in a cosmic court of game shows, with the same architecture, the same long table, the same air of irreversible judgment. There is an episode in which a small infraction at the park, the kind of thing that would normally earn a verbal warning, is suddenly the subject of a cosmic tribunal that has been assembled to weigh the spirit of the rule that was broken. The format is, every time, more or less the same. A long table, a panel of impossibly authoritative figures, a strict reading of obscure rules, a near loss, and a last-minute argument that hinges, almost always, on the principle that the person on trial was acting out of loyalty to a friend rather than out of selfishness. The trial is always won on those grounds. The show, in episode after episode, takes the position that cosmic courts will, in the end, rule in favor of love. That is, again, a quietly utopian position for a cable cartoon. The show holds it consistently. The cosmic, in regular show, is severe but not cruel. It will enforce its rules. It will also, in the end, accept the argument that the rules were written for the things they were written for, and that those things are still here. If you watch the death and afterlife episodes back to back, you start to feel the rhythm of how the show talks about endings. It is never abrupt. The show almost always gives the character at risk of ending a small final lap of consciousness, a moment in which they get to look around and decide whether to go or stay. Sometimes they stay, sometimes they go, sometimes they go and come back, but the lap is always given. That, more than anything else in the death episodes, is the move that makes them feel trippy without feeling cheap. The show is not using death as a shock. The show is using death as a stage on which the characters can finally say the thing they have been refusing to say for an entire season. The trip into the afterlife is, in the same family as the dream episodes and the time episodes, a stage for confession. It is the only room in the show where the lies do not work. The recurring death character himself deserves a closer look, because the show is unusually careful with him. He is not a joke. He is not a threat. He is more than anything a professional, and the show treats him with a kind of polite respect that you do not usually see between a cartoon ensemble and their reaper. He has tastes. He has preferences. He has a sense of humor that is dry and slightly tired, the humor of somebody who has seen every variation of every plea and is no longer surprised by any of them. He plays fair. He gets impatient when people try to wriggle out of agreements they made freely. He likes a clean wager. He is, in his way, the most honorable character in the cast, and the show seems to know that. When he shows up, the staff does not panic. They negotiate, they argue, they occasionally win, and he respects them more, you sense, for the way they negotiate than he would for any clever trick they could try to pull. The show, by writing him this way, is making a quiet argument about endings in general. The end is not something to outsmart. The end is something to bargain with honestly, in good faith, and to accept gracefully when the bargain runs out. The trippiest moment in the whole Death family, for many longtime fans, is the smaller scene, late in the run, when one of the regular characters who has been thought lost is briefly, quietly returned, in a way that the show treats as routine but the audience reads as miraculous. The scene is staged plainly. There is no spectacle. The lighting is soft. The other characters do not weep. They acknowledge. They move forward. The miracle is allowed to land without being underlined. That, more than any of the bigger cosmic court episodes, is the moment that captures the show's whole posture toward death. It is real. It is final, usually, but it is not the loudest thing in the room. The loudest thing in the room is the people who are still here, and the work they still have to do, and the quiet kindness they still owe each other. The trip is not the death. The trip is the gentleness on the other side of it. We are about a third of the way through the Trippy episode catalog, and we have already crossed into territory that most cartoons of the era never approached. We have walked through the dream episodes, the reality-bending episodes, the time episodes, and the death episodes. We still have to talk about the lore episodes that explain who Skips actually is, the lore episodes that explain who Pops actually is, the cosmic stakes that the show was always quietly building toward, and the long final arc set in literal outer space that closes the show. The night is long. Pull the blanket a little higher. Of all the recurring characters on regular show, the one whose backstory is the longest, the saddest, and the trippiest is Skips. On a surface read, Skips is the dependable older coworker, the one who can fix anything, lift anything, repair anything, and who knows, with calm certainty, the solution to any cosmic emergency that lands on the park. He is, in the early seasons, almost more of a tool than a character. When the staff is in trouble, you cut to Skips, he explains what to do, and then the team executes the plan. It is a sitcom convenience as much as a character. He has a small office. He has a small van. He keeps to himself. He skips instead of walking. That is the joke. That is the original joke. He skips. His name is Skips because he skips. And then, somewhere in the middle of the run, the show sits you down, in a single episode, and gently rewrites your entire understanding of him. The lore episode in question is the origin of Skips, and it is told the way an old man tells a hard story, slow and without ornament. We learn that Skips has been alive for an unspeakably long time, in a way that puts him well outside the lifespan of anything the rest of the cast can really comprehend. We learn that the reason he skips, instead of walking, is not a quirk. It is a vow. We learn that the vow was made to somebody he loved, and that the love was real and brief and ended badly, and that the only way he could keep her memory in his life every day was to refuse, for the rest of his existence, to walk normally. He skips because she asked him to. He skips because he promised. He has been skipping ever since. That is, in 11 minutes of a cable cartoon, one of the most quietly devastating pieces of character work the medium has ever done. The reason it lands is that the show has spent years training you to see Skips as a piece of furniture. He is the guy in the corner. He is the guy with the answers. He is the guy who can lift the cart. You never thought of him as a man with a love story. You never thought of him as a man at all, really. You thought of him as a yeti who could solve problems. And then the show tells you that under every skip, every single time you have ever seen him on screen, every single time he has skipped past Mordecai and Rigby in a hallway, he has been making a small physical promise to a woman who has been dead longer than most of human history. The whole show, in retrospect, is haunted by that. You cannot look at him the same way again. The show does not push that revelation hard. After the origin episode, Skips goes back to being Skips. He fixes things. He lifts the cart. He skips. He is calm. He is competent. The show does not soundtrack his every appearance with a sad note. It just lets you, the viewer, carry the new information and trust that you will let it color your read of him from now on. That is the kind of restraint a lot of more serious shows could learn from. The lore is given once. The lore is honored. The lore is not used as a constant emotional pressure point. It is allowed to settle into the soil under the character and his behavior. Every time he is on screen is allowed to be slightly more meaningful in the audience's eye while remaining outwardly identical. That is, in its way, a small trip in itself. The character did not change. Your perception of him did. The show rewrote not the world but your gaze, and that is, on a quiet level, exactly what a great surreal show should be able to do. There is more Skip's lore beyond the origin. In one episode, his real name, which is not Skip's, is briefly given, and most fans now know him by the name Walks, which is what he was called when he still walked. The audience is given the name, and then, very quickly, the show puts the name away again and goes back to calling him Skips, the way the character himself does. That choice, again, is loaded. The show is showing you that he has, by choice, become his vow more than his name. The vow is louder than the person. The person is willing for that to be true. That is a trippy proposition, by itself, when you sit with it. The whole identity of the most reliable character on the show is held together by a promise he made to someone who is no longer here. The show treats that as quietly heroic, in the way that long-kept promises are quietly heroic. There is also the recurring strand of episodes that hint, without ever fully revealing, that Skips has lived through every important era of human history. He drops a casual line in one episode about something he saw in a previous century. He references a tool that has not been used by anyone alive in living memory. He speaks, briefly, to a figure who could only be from a different timeline, and the figure recognizes him on sight. None of these moments are pushed. The show is not building a Forrest Gump-style montage of Skips meeting famous historical figures. The show is, instead, dropping small breadcrumbs that suggest the size of his life without ever asking the audience to walk the whole road. You are allowed to imagine the centuries. You are not given them. That, again, is craft. The trippiest thing about Skips is not the moments the show shows you. The trippiest thing is the moments the show implies and then politely declines to elaborate. There is also the Skips episode that is the most directly surreal in the catalog, the one in which a piece of new technology is introduced to the park in Skips, who has weathered the rise and fall of every prior technology, finds himself, for the first time in his very long life, lost. The episode is a small comedy on its surface, in which the old reliable character is bested by a smart device. It is, underneath, a quiet meditation on the way that long-lived beings keep their footing in a world that keeps reinventing its tools. Skips, in this episode, briefly considers giving up. He considers stepping back from his role as the team's fixer. The other characters notice. The show pulls him back, gently, by reminding him that what he is needed for is not, and was never, his knowledge of the latest device. What he is needed for is his judgment, his calm, and his willingness to be the person other people turn to in an emergency. That is not technology, that is character. The episode ends with him reconciled to his obsolescence as a tech support figure and renewed in his role as a steady presence. It is a smaller trip than the origin, but it is in the same family. It is a piece of his interior life that the show let you see, briefly, before politely closing the door. Then there is the episode in which a curse from his past returns to find him. The curse is honored by the show as a real piece of cosmic enforcement. The terms are explicit. The deadline is real. The way out, when it comes, is a piece of group effort that depends on the team accepting that the Skips they have always known is in fact somebody who has been carrying weight they cannot see. The episode is again, structurally a rescue, and the rescue again is the show's preferred ending. Nobody leaves alone. Even the immortal coworker who has been alone for centuries is not allowed to be alone here. That is the move. That is, repeatedly, the move. It is worth saying that the Skips lore episodes also do a quiet trick with grief, because they suggest, without underlining, that Skips has had to learn how to grieve over and over and over again, in a way that no other character on the show can really understand. He has lost more people than the rest of the cast combined. He has buried more friends than there are episodes of the show. The skip he does every time is one small physical refusal to let those losses harden him. He keeps the vow. He keeps the gentleness. He keeps the willingness to help the next pair of slacker 20-somethings who land on his lawn. That is, in the show's quiet way. One of the more graceful arguments for resilience you will find in a cable cartoon. The trip is not the immortality. The trip is the grace with which the immortal character has chosen to spend his time. The reason the Skips lore matters for a video about the trippiest episodes is that without Skips, the trip episodes would not function. He is the show's anchor. He is the one who, when reality bends, can explain what is bending and why. He is the one who, when time loops, knows how to break the loop. He is the one who, when death shows up, knows what to say to him. The show could not afford to put the cast through the kind of cosmic damage it likes to put them through if there were not, somewhere in the office, a tall, calm figure who has been through worse and is willing to walk into the kitchen with a wrench. That stability, that one quiet pillar in the corner of the room, is what makes the rest of the show able to bend without breaking. The trippy episodes are, in a sense, the show showing off how far it can lean from the pillar. The pillar is Skips. And once you know what the pillar has been carrying, every cosmic episode becomes a small additional weight on a back that has been carrying weight for a very long time. There is a small grace note at the end of the run, in the late seasons, where Skips briefly allows himself to acknowledge that the team he is working with might be, in some quiet way, the closest thing he has had to a real family in centuries. He does not say it loudly, the show would never let him, but the scene is there. He stands a little closer, he waits a little longer, he listens a little harder. The skip is, for a few frames, almost a step. He is, you sense, considering letting himself walk again. He does not. He keeps the vow. But he comes close enough to the threshold that you, the viewer, can see the cost of the vow and the love that has, in spite of the cost, kept showing up around him. That is, in its quiet way, one of the most moving things the show ever quietly did. And it is the kind of thing only a show that has earned its surreal credit can pull off. Because by that point, you, the viewer, are willing to believe in the rules of his world and willing to feel in your chest the weight of a man who, for love, will not let himself walk. The lore of Skips, in the end, sets up the lore of Pops. Because once you have accepted that one member of the cast is older and stranger than he looks, the show can begin, very slowly, to show you that another member of the cast is older and stranger still. Skips is centuries old. Pops, when the show finally lets you see, is something else again. We will walk into that next, gently, with the camera low. Pops is the trippiest character on regular show, and the show takes the entire run to admit it. For the first several seasons he is, on the surface, the gentlest joke in the cast. He is a small, soft, child-voiced figure with a body that looks like a lollipop. A perfectly round head perched on a thin little body in a tidy old-fashioned suit, and his entire personality is built around innocence and good cheer. He lives in the mansion at the top of the park. He is the son of the wealthy figure who built and owns the park, which gives him a kind of soft sovereignty over the place without ever making him act like an owner. He delights in everything. He is confused by almost everything. He is the character the writers can use in any episode as a small instrument of wonder. Mordecai and Rigby will be in the middle of a stupid scheme, and Pops will wander into the frame, fascinated by a leaf, and the scheme will pause, briefly, while everybody adjusts to his presence. For most of the run, that is what he is. He is the show's resident innocent. He is its emotional pacifier. When the show wants to slow down, it cuts to Pops sitting on a bench. When the show wants to lift the mood, it gives Pops a small new toy. He is, in functional terms, the show's softest texture, and the show seems content, for years, to leave him in that role. Then the late seasons arrive, and the show begins with extraordinary care to suggest that the softness was a costume. The first hints come in scattered episodes that, taken individually, look like jokes. Pops drops a casual line that does not quite fit his usual register. He demonstrates, briefly, a capacity that nobody else in the cast has. He has a fleeting moment of recognition with a character or place he should not recognize. The show plays each of these moments small. None of them are punctuated with stingers. None of them ask the audience to take notes. But the moments accumulate, season over season, until the show is finally ready to commit. By the late seasons, the show is openly building. In the background of seemingly ordinary episodes, a cosmology. There is a figure out in the dark of the universe who looks almost exactly like Pops, but inverted in every emotional and moral register. Where Pops is delight, this figure is malice. Where Pops is welcome, this figure is exclusion. Where Pops is wonder, this figure is contempt. The two of them, you slowly learn, are not coincidentally similar. They are bound, in some ancient way, to each other. They are, in the show's late mythology, a pair. two halves of a cosmic balance that has been operating on the universe since long before the park ever existed. Pops is the bright side. The other figure is the dark side. And the long balance between them is, the show begins to argue what holds the rest of reality in shape. That is, said out loud, a wild thing for a cartoon about two slacker park workers to commit to. The show, to its enormous credit, commits to it completely. It does not flinch. It does not soften it. It does not turn back to status quo. By the final season, the conflict between Pops and his cosmic counterpart is the engine that powers the closing arc of the show. The park itself, in a moment that almost no first-season viewer would have predicted, is uprooted from the ground and flung into outer space, because the conflict has escalated to a scale at which the planet can no longer safely contain it. We will get to the space arc in its own chapter. For now, what matters is that the whole reveal of who Pops is, all the cosmic stakes that hang on him in the late seasons, is, in retrospect, what every Trippy episode in the show was quietly building toward. The Pops lore episodes, watched in isolation, are some of the most committed surreal work in the show. There is an episode in which Pops, briefly, has a memory leak from his older self, and the show, with no warning, allows him to behave as a cosmic figure for a single scene before snapping him back to his usual softness. There is an episode in which a cousin or echo of the dark counterpart visits the park, in disguise, and Pops senses something is wrong long before the rest of the staff. There is an episode in which Pops has a quiet conversation with his father about why he is the way he is, and the father, normally a bombastic comic figure, becomes briefly tender, briefly sad, and briefly honest about the kind of being his son actually is. These episodes are not the loudest in the show. They are not always the funniest. But they are the ones that, on rewatch, hum with the show's secret cosmology, and they are the ones that turn the soft little lollipop man into something much, much larger than he first appeared. There is also, threaded through the late seasons, the recurring image of Pops looking, briefly, at the sky in a way that does not match how anybody else looks at the sky. He does not look up at it the way you would look at a beautiful evening. He looks up at it the way somebody looks at the place they came from. The show does not narrate this. It just lets the camera linger. He looks. He sighs. He smiles, sometimes. He goes back to whatever small earthly delight he was enjoying. That, by itself, is a quietly stunning visual. The character who has been the show's avatar of innocence is also, in the very same body, the show's avatar of a homesickness that no other character can feel. The Trip episodes about Pops do not invent that. They simply make it explicit. The hint was always there. The look at the sky was always there. The home was always somewhere else. When the show finally commits to its cosmic Pops mythology, it does so with a structure that is, by the standards of cable cartoons of the era, almost operatic. There is a prophecy. There is a chosen role. There is a long-anticipated confrontation. There is a price to be paid. The show, having spent 8 years carefully building a tone in which prophecies and chosen roles would seem ridiculous, suddenly cashes in all that earned credit and asks you to take the prophecy seriously. And because the show has been so careful with its world, you do. The mythology lands. The stakes are real. The confrontation, when it comes, is the kind of confrontation that other shows would not have the standing to attempt. Regular show has the standing because of every single small Trip episode that came before. The diner coma, the reality dice, the watch from the future, the bargains with death, the food court, the yes tape. Every one of those was a tiny installment payment on the cosmic credit the show would eventually need to spend on Pops. And when it spent it, the spending was, mostly, justified. There is a lot to say about what the show ultimately argues, through Pops, about the nature of goodness and the cost of being good. The show, in its late seasons, leans hard into the idea that the existence of bright, cheerful innocence in the world is not a default state. It is a stance. It is something a being chooses, knowing what the alternative is, and pays for daily. Pops is the way he is on purpose. He has, in some deep cosmic sense, looked at the other option, looked at his counterpart, looked at the universe on bad days, and chosen, again and again, to remain delighted by leaves. That is, on a quiet level, a major theological statement for a children's cartoon to make. Innocence, the show argues, is not naivete. Innocence is a discipline. It is the discipline of refusing, despite everything you have seen, to harden. Pops embodies it. The show, in its final movement, asks whether innocence so chosen can be enough to balance a universe whose other half is contempt. The answer the show eventually arrives at is, like a lot of the show's answers, neither cynical nor easy. We will not give it away here, because that is for the finale chapter. But it is fair to say, in the context of a video about Trippy episodes, that the entire run of Cosmic Pop's lore is the show finally letting its quietest character carry the heaviest weight. He is small, he is round, he is gentle. He is also, in the show's cosmology, the one thing in the universe that the dark half of the balance genuinely cannot tolerate, and the entire crew of the park, by the end, is in his orbit because his orbit is the orbit that decides whether the balance holds. That is, when you say it out loud, a fairly grand thing to do with the Lollipop Man. For long-time viewers, what makes the Pops reveal land is not the spectacle of the late-season cosmic episodes. It is the way the show retroactively recolors every gentle moment Pops ever had. Every leaf he ever marveled at, on rewatch, becomes a little more than a joke. Every small new word he ever learned becomes a little more than a beat. Every time he ever giggled at a balloon, or sat in the back of a car, or stared too long at a sunset, becomes, on rewatch, a tiny piece of the cosmic figure choosing to stay in the body. The show, in other words, did not change Pops late in the run. The show revealed Pops late in the run, and by revealing him, it rewrote, gently, every moment that came before. That is one of the trippiest moves any long-running show can make. You finish the run and start the run again, and the first episode is not the same episode it was the first time. The character on the bench is bigger now. The leaf is bigger now. The look at the sky was always there. You just did not know what it meant. It is fair to ask, given how big the show's mythology ultimately becomes, whether the writers always knew where they were going with Pops or whether the cosmic stakes were built up on the fly. The honest answer, as far as fans have pieced together, is that the show was on the air long enough, with a stable enough creative team, that the late-season cosmology was clearly built deliberately, but the small early hints in the first few seasons were probably more vibes than plan. The vibes were strong, however, and the plan, when it finally arrived, was able to pull those vibes into a coherent shape. That is, in its way, the right method for a show of this kind. The Trippy episodes were not all building toward the same finale, episode by episode, in some grand outline. The Trippy episodes were building a tone that, when the finale finally arrived, the finale could speak inside, without sounding crazy. The show earned the right to be cosmic by being slightly cosmic, casually, every week. By the time it wanted to be fully cosmic, the audience was ready. We are halfway through the catalog now. We have walked through the engine of the show, the dream episodes, the reality-bending episodes, the time episodes, the death episodes, and the lore episodes around the show's two most surreal characters. From here, the path runs through the cosmic stakes that the show built into the rest of its mythology, the long arc set in literal space, and the finale itself. There is still plenty of night ahead. The cosmic stakes in regular show do not arrive only through the dream episodes and the lore episodes. They are also baked into a small, recurring set of villains and threats that on their first appearances look like one-off bad guys, and only later turn out to be permanent furniture in the show's mythology. The trippiest thing about these characters is that they almost always return. The show, in its quiet way, runs a small Rolodex of cosmic enforcers, glove-handed bowling villains, talking household objects, malicious dimensional travelers, and resentful relics of older episodes. And the Rolodex is real. Characters that you would have sworn were defeated in their first appearance turn out, 3 seasons later, to have been only paused. The most famous of the cosmic enforcers in this group is the figure usually known by the name of an oversized glove that wants to bowl, or wants to be bowled with, depending on which episode you are watching. He shows up first as the high-concept enemy in a bowling episode, a glove with ambitions far larger than his current employment, who challenges the team to a game that will decide the fate of more than just the league. The bowling alley, for the duration of his arc, becomes a cathedral. The lane becomes a stage of cosmic judgment. The pins become small souls. The score becomes a tally with consequences far outside the game. The team wins, of course. The team always wins, because the show is built on the principle that friendship plus persistence plus a little luck can beat almost any cosmic opponent. But the glove is not done. He returns. He keeps returning. By the time the show is in its later seasons, he is, in his way, one of the more recognizable secondary villains the show has. And his presence in any episode automatically loads the episode with stakes that exceed the visible plot. The glove is, in the end, a small portable piece of the show's surrealism. He carries the cosmic with him. Wherever he is, the floor is thinner. There is a similar logic to the show's treatment of a small recurring villain who is a sentient piece of older media, the kind of half-forgotten format that the world has moved past. Watching the episode that introduces him, you assume he is a one-off gag, a personification of a piece of technology that the writers wanted to play with for a quick joke. He returns. He returns angrier. He returns with allies. He returns with a larger ambition. He becomes, over a few appearances, a quietly resonant figure for the entire show's relationship with the past. Because regular show is, more than almost any other cartoon of its era, an open love letter to the kind of media that is no longer mass-produced. Synthesizers from a decade nobody buys synthesizers from. Videotapes from a decade nobody buys videotapes from. Arcade cabinets from a decade nobody manufactures arcade cabinets in. The show is full of media artifacts that are technically obsolete, and the recurring villains who personify those artifacts are the show's quiet acknowledgement that obsolete things have an emotional life of their own. When they return as villains, they are not just bad guys. They are the show staging its own quiet argument that what looks dead may still want a conversation. There is also an entire family of episodes built around what we might call the unfinished encounter. A character will, in an early episode, meet a stranger who promises to return one day. The stranger will then disappear from the show for a long time. Just when you, the viewer, have stopped expecting the stranger to come back, the show will, in a third or fourth season episode, casually feature the stranger in a small cameo, often without comment. By the time the late seasons arrive, several of these unfinished encounters have resolved, often in surprising ways. The show, in other words, has a very long memory. Things that look thrown away in early seasons turn out to have been planted. That is, on a Trip episode level, one of the most rewarding things about a long rewatch. You realize the show is not just full of cosmic stakes in individual episodes. It is full of cosmic stakes that, like vines, grow across the seasons in slow, almost invisible ways, until they are finally thick enough to climb. There is a recurring class of episode where Mordecai and Rigby have to drive somewhere, and the drive itself becomes the trip. The drive episodes are some of the show's most quietly surreal work. The roads they travel are never quite the roads of any real country. The diners they stop at are never quite the diners of any real road. The fellow travelers they meet are sometimes obviously cosmic, like ghost truckers or living restaurants, and sometimes only suspiciously cosmic, like men with very specific knowledge of futures that have not yet happened. The show, over many of these drive episodes, builds a private mythology of the American road, which is the road as a horizontal staircase. It runs through nowhere. It promises everything. It collects strangers. It exacts a price for ignoring its etiquette. There is an episode in which a misplaced act of road discourtesy summons a cosmic trucker who will not stop pursuing the team until the discourtesy is rectified. There is an episode in which a chance meeting at a diner becomes a long, quiet evening with a man who, you slowly realize, is not entirely a man. There is an episode in which a vehicle the team is driving turns out to be alive, in a sense, and the relationship between the driver and the vehicle becomes briefly a love story, briefly a tragedy, briefly a friendship. The drives in regular show are never just drives. The drives are pilgrimages. And the show is always quietly aware of this, in a way that very few other cartoons of its decade ever even attempted. There are also the food episodes, which deserve their own pause, because regular show has more episodes than seems reasonable in which food is treated as a cosmic substance. We have already mentioned the Diner Coma episode and the cosmic court of sandwiches. But there are also episodes in which the perfect burger is hidden in a forgotten part of town, and the search for it becomes a quest with real magical hazards. There are episodes in which a pie contest summons something larger than the contest. There are episodes in which a sandwich, or a slice of pizza, or a sticky bun becomes the central object around which an entire half hour of escalating supernatural events organizes itself. Food in this show is not a backdrop. Food is periodically a gateway. There is a unifying through line in these episodes that the show is interested in the idea that the simple acts of preparing food and sharing food and consuming food are, when done with enough care, small acts of cosmic significance, the kind of acts that can either heal a relationship or break a soul, depending on how they are handled. The show plays this for laughs, in the surface text. It also, repeatedly, lets the joke land with the full weight of its surreal cosmology. The burger that is the best burger in the world will, when finally eaten, do something to the eater. The food is real. Beyond the food and the road, there is a recurring fixation in the show with games. Board games, video games, card games, drinking games, sports games, party games, that, in the show's universe, almost always invoke cosmic stakes. There is the bowling we have already mentioned. There is a basketball episode, in which the game itself becomes a portal to a higher league. There is a video game arcade episode, in which the highest score earns the player access to a level the developers themselves did not finish, and the unfinished level becomes a literal void. There is a card game that summons a being whose presence in the room rewrites the rules of the apartment. There is, recurring across multiple seasons, the sense that any time the team sits down to play, the universe may be playing back. That, in the show's mythology, is one of the most consistent of all its themes. Play, the show argues, is sacred. Play, taken seriously, is dangerous. Play, treated casually, often summons consequences that the players did not consent to. The show is, in many ways, a long meditation on the idea that the line between fun and ritual is much thinner than the adult world likes to admit. Inside all of these episode families, the show also keeps building up the supporting cast in quiet, surreal ways. Muscle Man is, on the page, a stocky guy with a green skin tone and a relentlessly committed personality, who lives in a trailer and tells the same joke about his mother in every episode. Over the run, he becomes something more complicated. He has a long romance with the receptionist of a nearby restaurant, and the romance plays out over years, with all the messy starts and stops a real long romance has. He has, in moments, surprising moments of grief, vulnerability, and self-awareness. There is an entire episode arc that depends on his ability to take seriously the cosmic implications of a wedding. There is, more than once, a moment in which his absurd brick-thrown persona quietly cracks open, and you can see the gentle, somewhat lonely person underneath. High Five Ghost, his small floating companion, is similarly given more interior life than his early appearances would have suggested. There is an episode in which the ghost finds love in another ghost, with all the awkwardness of any first relationship. There is an episode in which his presence in the office is, briefly, threatened, and the cast realizes how much they have come to take him for granted. The show's secondary cast is, in its quiet way, a small ecosystem of beings whose lives, when the show pulls back the curtain, are as full as the leads. That, by itself, is a piece of the trippy worldview the show holds. Nobody on this show is a flat extra. Everybody, when the camera lingers long enough, turns out to be a whole person with a whole life, and that fullness, that refusal to treat any character as background, is part of why the cosmic stakes hit the way they hit. The show is not bargaining for any abstract version of friendship. It is bargaining for these specific people. There is also the strange long line of episodes about Benson, the gumball machine boss, that quietly become some of the most interesting character work in the show. Benson begins as the irritated middle manager. He is the obstacle. He is the one whose authority Mordecai and Rigby are always testing. He has, in early episodes, the energy of every angry sitcom boss you have ever seen. Over the run, however, the show begins, with surprising care, to give him interiority. There is the episode about his birthday. There is the episode about his father. There is the episode about his romantic life. There is the episode in which, briefly, he is given everything he ever wanted in his career, and discovers that what he actually wanted was a chance to be respected by the people he works with, not by people higher up the corporate ladder. The trippiest episode in his small arc is the one in which he is briefly possessed, in a sci-fi sense, and the team has to choose between the comfort of a more cooperative Benson and the harder truth that they would rather have their actual grumpy, real boss back. They choose the real one. That choice, by the show, is not played for a laugh. It is played as a quiet love letter, from a long-running ensemble to a character who, on a lesser show, would have stayed flat for the entire run. By the time the show has fully built out its cosmic enforcers, its road mythology, its food cosmology, its game cosmology, and the surprisingly full interior lives of every member of its supporting cast, it is ready to do the thing nobody could have predicted from the pilot, which is to take the entire park and the entire ensemble and physically remove them from the planet. That move, the space arc, is the longest, strangest, most committed piece of trip work the show ever attempted, and it is what we will walk into next. The space arc is, by a comfortable margin, the strangest sustained move regular show ever made, and it is also one of the most committed shifts of premise that any long-running sitcom has ever attempted in its closing stretch. For 7 seasons, regular show has been a show about a park. It has, of course, been a show about much more than a park, as we have spent the last hour walking through. But the park has always been there. The cart, the mansion, the office, the benches, the trees, the fountain, the break room, the vending machine, the little house Mordecai and Rigby share. These spaces are the show's geography. They are where you find the show when you tune in. Every cosmic event, every dream, every time loop, every reality bend has eventually returned the characters to this small physical world. The park has been the constant. The park has been home. In the final season, the show takes the park, in a single quiet act of mythology, and lifts it. The ground unscrews itself from the planet, the building floats free of its foundations, and the entire ensemble finds itself, with no time to prepare, in literal outer space. The reason is cosmic. The reason is, ultimately, the dark counterpart to Pops, who has finally moved out of the long quiet shadow of the previous seasons and into open conflict with everything Pops represents. The conflict has grown too big for the planet. The park, with everybody in it, has been removed for safekeeping. From that moment on, the show is a different show. The kind of stories the show tells, the kind of episodes it can produce, the kind of jokes it can make, all change, because the basic geography has changed. The cart is now a cart in zero gravity. The mansion is now a mansion in the void. The vending machine boss is now a vending machine boss in space, which is, somehow, both more absurd and more dignified than the original premise. The reason this works, the reason this does not feel like the show losing its mind, is that the show has spent 8 years preparing the audience to accept it. Every Trippy episode we have already walked through tonight is, in a quiet way, an installment payment on the credibility the show needs to ask the audience for this enormous final swing. The space arc would not work if you, the viewer, did not already believe in cosmic courts and time loops and dream chickens and reality dice and immortal yetis and a lollipop man with a hidden mythology. By the time the show asks you to accept a park in space, you have already accepted the rest of the universe the show built, and the park in space is just one more piece of the same furniture, scaled up. The show earned the move. The audience said yes. What is fascinating about the space arc as a piece of television is how much of it is, structurally, the same show. The episodes inside the space arc are still, mostly, slacker episodes. Mordecai and Rigby still avoid chores. Benson is still annoyed. Pops still delights in small things. Muscle Man still tells his joke. The cosmic background is enormous, but the foreground is, defiantly, a sitcom. You watch two friends argue about a snack inside a building that is currently floating in a vacuum. You watch a Yeti mechanic adjust a vending machine boss inside a mansion that is suspended over a starfield. You watch a small floating ghost feel briefly homesick for a tree. The juxtaposition is, on its own, one of the trippiest things the show ever did. The show is, in its closing arc, refusing to abandon the texture of its own normalcy, even as the universe behind that normalcy has become as cosmic as the universe ever gets. That, more than the spectacle, is what gives the arc its emotional weight. The show is, in effect, arguing that the small daily life of these characters is worth defending against any size of cosmic backdrop. The cosmic does not get to erase the small. The small is, in fact, what the cosmic is being fought for. The space arc also gives the show, finally, a stage on which to fully unfold its mythology of Pops. The dark counterpart appears. The prophecy is referenced. The long-planned confrontation begins to organize the season around itself. Episodes that look like single-shot adventures turn out to be steps toward the confrontation. Side characters from earlier seasons return, often with new context, often with new abilities, often with a small line that acknowledges a previous unfinished encounter. The show, in its final season, is gathering its own deep history into one room, and the act of gathering is itself a trip. You watch a character you had forgotten reappear, and remember, in a flash, the episode they came from. The show, by remembering all of itself, is asking you to remember all of it too. That is, by itself, an act of trust between a long-running show and its audience that very few shows of any kind ever pull off. There are episodes inside the space arc that are pure cosmic adventure, in the most lavish visual register the show ever attempted. There are entire dimensions. There are alien civilizations. There are space stations. There are zero-gravity hallways with their own internal weather. There are episodes that take place entirely on small foreign moons. There are episodes that take place entirely inside the engine of the park itself. The show, having committed to the premise, is willing to extract as much variety from it as the premise can yield. And because the show has always been formally light on its feet, the new geography never feels like a stretch. The show can do a tightly contained domestic episode in a single room of the floating mansion. The show can do a sprawling space chase across a system of asteroids. The show can do a quiet conversation episode in which two characters drift together in the void and finally talk about something they have been avoiding. All of these registers are available because the space arc is, in essence, the show finally giving itself the largest possible playground without losing the ensemble that earned it. There is also, woven through the space arc, a real and quiet acknowledgement that this is the closing chapter. The show is allowed, in its final season, to be a little nostalgic for itself. Characters reference earlier seasons. Old gags are revisited, gently, without being repeated. Old relationships are looked at in a new light. The cast, in subtle ways, behaves like a family that knows it is in the last weeks of a long living arrangement, and the audience, watching, feels it. The space arc, for all its spectacle, is also, underneath, a long farewell. The show is using the size of the new geography to give itself the room it needs to say a proper goodbye to its own world. The trip is enormous. The reason for the trip is to make the eventual return feel earned. There is a particular family of space arc episodes that deserves a pause because they are the most directly trippy of the entire show's run. They are the episodes in which the team encounters cosmic beings that, in any other show, would be reserved for season finale climaxes. The space arc treats these encounters as routine. There is an episode in which the park drifts past something so large that the show cannot fit it in frame and only suggests it through its shadow. There is an episode in which a member of the cast briefly speaks to something whose face the show refuses to show and whose voice is delivered, calmly, from outside the camera frame. There is an episode in which the team accepts hospitality from a being who reveals, in passing, that he has been watching the show, in his way, for the entire run, and that he is glad they finally came to visit. None of these moments are played as twists. They are played as visits. The space arc is, in a sense, the show finally introducing the audience to the cosmic neighbors, who have been politely waiting in the wings for 8 years. It is worth noting that the space arc is also where the show's emotional honesty reaches its highest pitch. With the cast in zero gravity, with the planet far below, with the long-planned confrontation looming, there is less room for the daily distractions that the characters have been using to avoid their real conversations. They have to talk to each other. There is no other geography to escape into. There is no other diner to drive to. There is no other apartment to retreat to. The park is the world is suspended in nothing, and the cast, finally, has to be honest. Mordecai and Rigby say things to each other in the space arc that they would not have been able to say on the lawn. Margaret and CJ, in their respective late-season threads, are afforded a chance to be honest in ways that the earlier seasons had not always allowed. Skips, in moments, lets the team see something of the weight he has been carrying. Pops, more than ever, allows himself to be looked at as the cosmic being he is, and the cast, more than ever, allows itself to look at him with that knowledge. The space arc is not just cosmic. The space arc is intimate, in a way that the earlier seasons could not quite have been, because the earlier seasons always had the comfort of the grass under their feet, and that comfort, for a show about avoidance, is a problem. The trippiest visual sequences of the entire show live inside the space arc. There are sequences in which the camera pulls back from the park so far that the park becomes a small bright object against a starfield, and the music drops to almost nothing, and you watch a thing you have known for years become tiny against a backdrop that does not know it is there. There are sequences in which a character is briefly outside the building, in a suit, looking back at the only home they have ever had floating in a place it was not designed for. There are sequences in which two characters share a meal at a table whose edges are not visible against the dark, and the meal becomes the entire foreground of the frame, with the cosmic backdrop quietly behind. The show, in these sequences, is operating at a level of visual confidence that almost nobody would have predicted from the early episodes. The simple flat color world has been allowed to expand into something that looks, briefly, like a serious science fiction film. And the characters in the foreground, in their simple shapes, in their familiar voices, anchor the spectacle in something tender. The conflict with the dark counterpart, when it finally lands big. Without giving the specifics in a way that ruins the emotional shape for anyone who has not yet watched, what matters is that the conflict is resolved in a way that is true to the show's quiet thesis from the very first season. The cosmic, as enormous as it is, cannot defeat the small unless the small lets it. The dark counterpart is, in the end, dependent on cynicism. Pops, in the end, is dependent on love. The fight between them is, structurally, a fight between two postures toward existence. The team is on the side of love because the team is the love. They show up. They keep showing up. They refuse, even in space, to abandon a single member of the ensemble. The cosmic counterpart, faced with that posture, eventually has no leverage. The show wins, not by overpowering its villain, but by quietly demonstrating that the villain's worldview is not, in the end, true. That is a remarkably gentle final move for a final season to make, and the show, almost miraculously, pulls it off. The space arc ends with the park returned, or returned enough, to a place it can resume being a park. The cosmic recedes. The dust settles. The team, changed, walks back into a daily life that has, in some ways, been preserved exactly as they left it, and in some ways been altered forever. From here, the show has one more move to make, and it is the largest emotional move it ever attempted. And it is one of the only moves that justifies all the cosmic credit the show had been quietly building. That move is the finale, and it is what we will sit with next. The hour is late. There is no need to rush. The finale of regular show is, in many ways, the trippiest episode the show ever produced, even though it does not involve a single demon, a single dimension hop, a single cosmic court, a single time loop, or a single piece of reality bending. The finale is built almost entirely out of one move, and the move is one regular show had been quietly preparing for years. The move is the time leap. After all of the cosmic noise of the late seasons, after the park has been to space and back, after the dark counterpart has been faced and the conflict has been resolved, the show looks at its own ensemble and quietly says, "All right, now we are going to skip forward, and we are going to do it gently, and we are going to do it for real." And then it does. The finale opens softly. The cast is together. The park is restored more or less. The world has resumed. The cosmic, for the moment, has receded into the background of an ordinary evening. The team gathers, the way they have always gathered, around a small mundane thing, and the show, for a long stretch, allows itself the luxury of just being a sitcom one last time. It is, in retrospect, one of the most generous things the writers could have done, which is to give the audience a final, pure dose of the show as it always was, before the show begins its slow act of saying goodbye. There is no spectacle in this opening movement. There is just the team, together, doing the kind of small, ordinary things they have always done. You watch it, and you, the viewer, can feel the show settling in for the goodbye. You can feel the show breathing. Then the leap begins. The show, with no warning, allows a long stretch of time to pass on screen. And the way it allows that time to pass is one of the most quietly daring choices any animated finale has ever made. The leap is not a single time skip cut. The leap is not a quick title card. The leap is, in essence, an extended sequence in which the show takes the audience by the hand and walks them through the next several years of every character's life, one by one, with care and patience. You see who stays in the park. You see who leaves the park. You see who comes back. You see who finds love. You see who loses it. You see who has children. You see who quietly grows old. You see the people you have followed for 8 years go on to live the lives the show implied they would live. You are given the full futures the show has been hinting at since the early seasons. And the show, in giving them, never blinks. There is no cynicism. There is no irony. There is just the patient generosity of a show that, having earned its standing through years of cosmic trips, uses its final hours to give you the gift of seeing where these specific characters end up. That sequence is, on a purely formal level, one of the trippiest things the show ever attempted. Because what it asks of the audience is enormous. It asks you to accept, in a matter of minutes, the long unfolding of decades. It asks you to grieve, in real time, the loss of certain familiar versions of these characters. It asks you to celebrate, in real time, the new versions they become. It asks you, in essence, to compress the emotional experience of a long, quiet rewatch into a single, sustained reaction. And the show, by the time it asks this, has earned the right to ask it. Because every trippy episode that came before has been preparing you for the truth that time, in this show, is the real subject. The diner coma, the watch from the future, the loop in the woods. The visit to the cosmic court, the staircase at the end of the hall, the small leaks of future episodes into present ones were all rehearsals for this. The finale is the recital. And the recital is delivered with the kind of restraint that very, very few finales of any kind manage. The leap, importantly, is not just a montage. The show lingers for whole minutes in the futures of certain characters. There is a stretch in which the show simply allows you to watch Mordecai live a quiet adult life, with all the small disappointments and small consolations and small everyday graces that adult life carries. The stretch is not played for comedy. It is played for honesty. There is a similar stretch for Rigby. There is a similar stretch for Margaret. There is a similar stretch for Eileen. There is a similar stretch for Muscle Man and his partner. There is a similar stretch for Benson. There is a similar stretch for High Five Ghost. There is a similar stretch for almost every character the show has spent meaningful time with. The show is, in its closing hour, refusing to leave anybody behind. The future is, for every character, allowed to be longer and richer and stranger than any single episode in the series ever had time to show. The show writes them all into something resembling real lives, and then writes them, gently, into older versions of themselves, and then, eventually, into the kind of reflective old age that almost no cartoon of its era ever bothered to give its cast. What makes The Leap trippy, in the deeper sense, is the way it slowly transforms your relationship to the show that came before. You watch the early seasons differently after the finale. You watch the slacker episodes, knowing what these specific slackers will eventually become. You watch the romantic awkwardness, knowing how it eventually resolves. You watch the cosmic adventures, knowing how this particular ensemble will eventually scatter, in the kindest possible way, into the rest of their lives. The Leap, in other words, is the show using its closing hour to retroactively change every prior episode. Every joke is now a joke with a longer shadow. Every chore is now a chore that was, in retrospect, one of a small finite number of chores left in a particular shared chapter. Every small fight between Mordecai and Rigby is now a small fight inside a friendship that you know, by the finale, will last. The show, by leaping, makes the present of every prior episode poignant, in a way it could not have been the first time. That is, structurally, the trippiest move a long-running show can make on its own past, and the show does it with no winking and no fuss. The Leap also addresses, finally, the question of who Pops actually is, in a way that is too central to the finale's emotional arc to spoil here, but that is, even at a distance, one of the most heartfelt closures any animated mythology has ever attempted. The cosmic conflict of the late seasons is, by The Leap, allowed to find a kind of resting place. The dark counterpart, the prophecy, the long balance, are all permitted, in the finale, to land in a posture that the show argues, very quietly, was the only posture that was ever really available to them. The argument is not one of vengeance. The argument is not one of victory. The argument is one of grace. The show, having spent its trippy episodes building a universe in which love is, in the end, the ground state of the cosmic, asks the cosmic, in its finale, to live up to that ground state. And the cosmic gently does. There is a particular sequence late in the finale that for a lot of long-time fans is the moment the show fully delivers on every promise it ever quietly made. The sequence is small, it is not loud, it is, in essence, a quiet farewell among friends, in a familiar room, at a time of year that the show has been associated with since its earliest episodes. The lighting is soft, the score is restrained, the characters are mostly silent, they look at each other. They acknowledge what is ending, they do not try to pretend it is not ending, they let it end. They walk out into the rest of their lives. The show, in this sequence, is allowed to be sad. It is also, in this sequence, allowed to be grateful. The two registers are held in balance, and the balance is held without strain. The show is, in that moment, fully in possession of itself, and the moment lands accordingly. You can read the entire run of trippy episodes, in retrospect, as the show's slow accumulation of the courage required to attempt that finale. The reality-bending episodes taught the writers that the show could ask the audience to accept anything if the audience was set up correctly. The dream episodes taught the writers that the show could be honest about feelings if it borrowed the honesty from a strange setting. The time episodes taught the writers that the show could compress and stretch time without losing the audience. The death episodes taught the writers that the show could let endings be real. The lore episodes taught the writers that the show could quietly rewrite a character without breaking him. By the time the finale arrived, the writers had, in essence, taught themselves how to do exactly the move the finale required. In 8 years of rehearsal, in episode after episode that, at the time, looked like just another goofy half hour. The finale was the exam. The trippy episodes were the entire syllabus. It is fair to say that the finale is, by general critical consensus, one of the strongest animated series finales of its era, and the reason it is strong is precisely that it does not rely on the cosmic spectacle the show was capable of. The cosmic spectacle is in the previous arc. The finale uses the cosmic only to honor the small. The leap, the goodbyes, the futures, the families, the homes. These are domestic images, used at a cosmic scale, and the scale is permitted only because the show has by then established the right to use it. A show that had only ever been a sitcom could not have pulled off a leap this large without it feeling silly. A show that had only ever been a cosmic fantasy could not have pulled off a leap this intimate without it feeling small. Regular show, having been both for 8 years, was, in the finale, finally allowed to be both at once, and the combination was the closest thing the medium has come to a truly satisfying long-form goodbye in the animated form. After the leap, after the futures, after the goodbyes, the show, in its final moments, does one last quietly trippy thing, which is to allow itself a small final scene of the original ensemble, in a familiar register, doing a familiar thing. It is a coda. It is a reassurance. It is the show telling the audience that, in the deepest sense, the characters are still those characters, in some quiet, eternal version of the park, even after the leap has resettled them into older versions of themselves. The coda is small, it would be easy to miss. It is also, on rewatch, one of the most emotionally generous things the show ever did. It is the show saying, quietly, that the park is still there, that the friendships are still there, that the cosmic neighborhood is still there, that everything we have walked through together tonight is in some sense still happening every time anybody puts on an episode. The trip, by the finale, is allowed to belong to the audience, not just to the characters. There is no clean way to wrap up a show like this. There is no single moment that captures everything regular show was. There is no last line that lands all the weight. But the finale, taken whole, gets remarkably close. And it does so by trusting the audience to feel, simultaneously, the smallness of two friends saying goodbye on a familiar porch, and the largeness of the cosmic ground that the show has spent 8 years quietly preparing under their feet. The trippy episodes, in the end, were not separate from the heart of the show. The trippy episodes were the heart of the show. They were the show's way of arguing, week after week, that the universe was much bigger than the lawn, and that the lawn, for that reason, was worth defending with everything anybody had. The finale is the show saying that out loud, in its softest voice, on its way out the door. Now that we have walked through the architecture of the trippy episodes, the families and the philosophy and the long arcs, it is worth circling back slowly to a smaller handful of specific episodes that might not have come up by name yet. Episodes that, even by regular shows' high standards of cosmic surrealism, do something that is worth pausing on for its own sake. These are the episodes that, on any honest list of the trippiest moments the show ever put on screen, deserve a longer look. They are not always the most famous. They are sometimes buried in the middle of seasons. They are sometimes considered, by casual viewers, to be minor entries. But on a careful rewatch, they reward the attention, because they show the show working at its highest pitch of surreal invention with very little fanfare. The first of these is the early episode in which Mordecai, having lost a hand of a small bet involving a video game high score, finds himself locked into a contest he cannot back out of. A contest whose loser will be condemned to a fate the show, in its quiet way, treats as functionally equivalent to a small soft death. The episode is structured as a pure gaming half-hour, with the camera mostly on a single arcade cabinet, a single controller, and a small audience of friends gathered around it. There is nothing visually cosmic for most of its runtime. The camera is tight on the screen, the lighting is low, the score is sparse, and yet by the closing minutes the stakes have, without any explicit dimensional travel, been escalated to a point where the entire room feels like a chapel. The game has become a sacrament. The score has become a verdict. The friends in the audience have become, briefly, a congregation. And then the game ends, and the players blink, and the lights come up, and the chapel becomes an arcade again. And everybody goes home. The trip, in this episode, lives entirely in tone. The show, by simply holding the room long enough and quietly enough, has performed a cosmic ritual using only a video game. That is, on its own, a small miracle of writing. A second example, less subtle, but in some ways more impressive, is the episode set inside the radio dimension. The premise is that an old transmitter at a forgotten station has been kept on by a small group of devoted listeners, and the team, drawn into the broadcast by accident, find themselves inside a dimension shaped by sound waves rather than by light. The visual approach to this episode is one of the show's most adventurous. The geometry is built out of waveforms. The horizon hums. The walls oscillate. The characters move with a slight rhythmic resistance, as if their bodies have to push against the standing waves of the dimension itself. The show, having committed to this premise, spends the entire episode inside it, and never once breaks tone. The radio dimension feels like a place. The characters move through it the way characters in a more ambitious science fiction show might move through a physical alien world. And the resolution when it comes is, satisfyingly, an act of music. The way out is through a note. The trip is escaped by hitting the right frequency. That is, in 11 minutes, one of the more inventive uses of dimensional travel any cartoon of its era ever attempted. And it is one of the episodes that, on a careful rewatch, you realize you should have been talking about for years. A third example, much quieter than either of the first two, is the episode in which a character receives, in the mail, an object from his own past. And the act of opening the object initiates a slow series of small temporal slips, each one no longer than a few seconds. Each one taking him briefly back into a memory he has not chosen to revisit. The episode is structured as a normal day, with these tiny slips scattered through it, and the show never makes a spectacle of them. There is no time travel imagery. There is no dramatic music. There is just, every so often, a soft cut and a memory and a soft return. The character, by the end of the episode, has to decide whether to send the object back, keep it, or destroy it. The decision is private. The show does not narrate it. The episode ends with the object in the character's hand and the audience invited to imagine what he chose. That kind of restraint is by itself a trippy choice in a half-hour cable cartoon, because most cartoons of any era would never trust an audience to sit with an open ending. Regular show trusts you. The trust is one of the strangest things about the show. There are also episodes that are, on their faces, simple party episodes, but which, on examination, contain some of the show's strangest moments. There is an episode in which a single party at the house gets out of hand in a way that quietly bends time inside the house. Hours pass. The party continues. The guests do not seem to notice. The team eventually realizes that something is wrong only when they step outside and find that the world outside has not moved. The party, in some sense, has become its own dimension, with its own internal clock, separate from the rest of the show. The episode resolves cleanly, but the implication is left intact. The house, in regular show, is at least slightly capable of holding its own time. That is again a quietly destabilizing thing to introduce into the world of a sitcom. And the show, characteristically, does not make a fuss about it. There are the rare experimental episodes where the show, for some structural reason, departs from its own visual style. There is an episode that briefly recasts the team in a more stylized art style for a long flashback sequence. There is an episode that, for a particular dream sequence, drops the show entirely into a stark, high-contrast register that looks like nothing else in the run. There is an episode that, for a single short scene, animates the characters in what looks like a forgotten European animation tradition, with a different line weight, a different color palette, and a different sense of motion. None of these departures are explained. They are simply attempted. The audience is trusted to receive them. The next episode returns to the show's default look. The trip in these visual departures is not narrative. The trip is in the texture itself. The show, briefly, becomes a different show, and then becomes itself again. And the difference is allowed to linger in the audience without being underlined. There is, in the long middle of the run, a Halloween special segment that deserves its own pause, because it is one of the most committed pieces of small-scale horror any cartoon of the period attempted. The segment is structured as a single long claustrophobic encounter inside a familiar room, with a familiar character who is slowly revealed to be not quite himself. The show resists the obvious move, which would be to make the wrongness loud. The wrongness, in this segment, is almost entirely conveyed through small disagreements with normal behavior. A pause that lasts a beat too long. A repeated phrase said the second time with a slightly different emphasis. A look at the camera. A door that, between two cuts, has moved by an inch. By the closing minutes, the segment has built up such a sustained sense of dread that the eventual reveal, when it comes, is almost a relief. The show, in this segment, demonstrates that it understood, even at the level of a half-hour Halloween anthology, the principle that horror is most effective when it is built from small breaks in normalcy rather than from large breaks in geometry. That, for a cable cartoon, is a level of craft you do not always expect. There are episodes built around the idea that a small object has a hidden history that, when revealed, briefly rewrites the present. A pair of shoes turns out to have belonged to somebody whose curse is now active. A piece of furniture turns out to have been the focal point of an old ritual. A vehicle turns out to have been the property, in a previous incarnation, of a being whose claim is still legally enforceable in a cosmic court. The show is full of these object histories, and almost every one of them is delivered with the same calm assurance. The object is presented. The object is used. The history is revealed. The history is dealt with. The object is, in most cases, returned to its place, with the history acknowledged but not in the show's quiet way. Eliminated, that, by itself, is a trippy posture for a long-running show to hold. The objects in this world carry their histories with them. The histories cannot be erased. They can only be lived alongside. There is a particular family of episodes that we have not yet talked about directly, the ones in which the show briefly steps outside its normal point of view and follows a minor character through a day in their life. Most cable cartoons of the era would not have bothered. Regular show did, more than once. There is an episode that follows one of the small office workers through their otherwise unseen daily routine, and the episode lets you see the cosmic backdrop of the park from the perspective of somebody for whom it is not the foreground. There is an episode that follows a passing visitor to the park, briefly, and the visitor's encounter with the cosmic edge of the show's universe is treated with the wide-eyed awe of somebody who is not used to it. These episodes are quietly destabilizing. They remind you that the show's universe is not, in some objective sense, normal. It is normal only because the regular cast has gotten used to it. To anybody on the outside, the park is a place where impossible things happen all the time. And the impossible is, on those outside terms, properly impossible. The show acknowledges this every so often by stepping outside its own routine and letting you see the routine through a stranger's eyes. The trip, in those episodes, is the show looking at itself. There are even, scattered through the run, a handful of episodes in which the show flirts with the possibility that the park itself is alive. Not in a spectacular way, not as a clear plot premise, but in small recurring touches. The grass grows back faster after certain conversations. The benches creak in time with certain emotional beats. The trees, in certain seasons, seem to lean toward the mansion. None of these are pushed. None of these are made explicit. They are just, again, things you start to notice on a careful rewatch. The park, in regular show, is not quite a passive setting. It is a place that responds, in its quiet way, to what its inhabitants are doing. That is, if you let yourself sit with it, one of the trippiest implications the show ever made. The job of caring for the park, which the team treats as a chore, is, possibly, in some quiet way, a small partnership with a thing that knows them. The job is bigger than it looks. It always was. When you finish a long rewatch of regular show, the strange thing is that the trippy episodes, as a category, dissolve. You stop being able to separate them from the rest of the show, because you realize that every episode is, in some way, a trippy episode. The grass is alive. The objects have histories. The vending machines have feelings. The boss has interior life. The Yeti has a vow. The lollipop man is a cosmic being. The reaper is a neighbor. Time has a face. Death has a wife. The park has a will. There is no episode of this show that is purely a sitcom. There is no episode of this show that is purely a fantasy. The whole show was from the pilot, the same show, and the same show was all along trippy, in the deepest, most coherent sense of the word. You can pick a favorite trip. You can argue about which episode is the strangest. You can rank the cosmic courts and the dream sequences and the time loops in any order you like. But the show as a whole will not really sit still for that kind of ranking, because the show is one long trip, and the individual episodes are simply the small windows you got to look through on the nights you happen to be watching. The audience that grew up with this show, the audience that watched it the first time in real time, late at night, on a school night, with the sound just barely loud enough to avoid waking parents, has in its way carried the show into a strange afterlife of its own. Regular show was never the loudest show on its network. It was rarely the most awarded. It was rarely the most discussed. But it lasted. It built. It moved at its own pace. And it left, in the cultural soil, a small persistent shape. The shape of a half-hour cable cartoon that was unafraid to be cosmic about lawn maintenance, unafraid to take the spiritual lives of household objects seriously, unafraid to give its supporting cast full emotional weight, and unafraid, at the end, to leap forward in time with all of its characters and gently set them down in lives the show had been quietly imagining for them for years. That is, in a way, the trip the audience took along with the show. The trip was the entire run. It is worth, before we close the night, sitting with the question of why the trippy episodes of regular show worked when so many similar attempts on other shows did not. The era in which regular show aired was full of cartoons that tried to graft cosmic stakes onto sitcom premises, and not all of them succeeded. Some shows leaned too hard into the cosmic and lost the small. Some shows leaned too hard into the sitcom and lost the cosmic. Some shows kept the two on opposite sides of a wall and never let them speak. Regular show, almost uniquely, allowed the two registers to live in the same room, at the same volume, in the same scene. And the fact that they never collided is, on reflection, a quiet feat of tone management. A lot of the credit, in hindsight, belongs to the creative team's willingness to trust the audience. The show almost never explained itself. The show almost never paused to tell you that this was the part where you should be amazed. The show, at its trippy peak, would casually drop a cosmic quart into the middle of an episode about a sandwich, and then move on to the next episode about a chore, with no fanfare in between. That refusal to flag the surreal is, on a craft level, one of the trippiest things the show ever did. It taught the audience, episode by episode, that the surreal in this universe was not the exception. It was the rule. It was just usually quieter than tonight. By the time the show began doing its largest swings, the audience had been trained, for years, to take them in stride. The whole thing was, in a way, a long, quiet experiment in audience conditioning, and the audience, in the end, was willing to be conditioned, because the show had earned the trust required. The other thing that made the trippy episodes work was the show's commitment to its own ground state of friendship. Most of the Trip episodes, at their core, are not really about the cosmic event in the foreground. They are about how the team metabolizes the cosmic event together. Mordecai and Rigby do not solve their problems alone. They solve them with Skips. They solve them with Pops. They solve them with Benson. They solve them with Muscle Man. They solve them with High Five Ghost. They solve them with the rotating cast of friends and neighbors who over the years become an extended family of sorts. The cosmic events are, in a sense, the show's way of stress testing that family. The cosmic events ask every time whether the family will hold. Every time, the family holds. That answer, repeated week after week, is what gives the show its emotional spine. The trippy episodes are not really about whether the universe will be saved. They are about whether the team will stay together long enough to save it. And the answer is, again and again, yes, they will. They always will. That answer is, in the end, the show's quiet thesis about the cosmic in general. The universe is huge. The universe is strange. The universe is full of things that want to bend you. The universe also, in the show's view, can be navigated, gently and successfully, by a small group of friends who refuse to abandon each other and who are willing to take the next strange thing seriously. That is, in the end, a hopeful worldview. It is not a naive worldview. It accepts that the strange will keep coming. But it argues, with quiet persistence, that the strange does not have the final say. The friendship has the final say. The willingness to stand in the same room together has the final say. The cosmic is real. The cosmic is also, in the end, smaller than the team that walks into it with each other. There is something quietly remarkable about the way the show ages. A lot of the surface trappings of regular show, the synthesizer score, the boxy old televisions, the analog cars, the slacker comedy of the late aughts and early 2010s, are very specifically of their time. You can date the show, almost to the year, from its visual language and its references. But the trippy episodes, on rewatch, do not feel dated. They feel, if anything, more potent than they did the first time. The cosmic quartz hold up. The dream sequences hold up. The time loops hold up. The lore of Skips and Pops holds up. The space arc holds up. The finale holds up. The show, in other words, built its strangest moments on emotional foundations that do not age. And the emotional foundations are still load-bearing years after the original broadcast. That is rare. That is in fact vanishingly rare for a cable cartoon of the era. The shows that age this well are usually the ones that, beneath their formal surfaces, were actually about something. Regular show, beneath its formal surface, was actually about friendship over time, about innocence as a discipline, about endings as a kind of negotiation, and about the impossibly thin membrane between the ordinary and the cosmic. None of those topics expire. The show, accordingly, has not expired. The show also gave a generation of viewers, many of whom grew up with it, a private vocabulary for talking about the cosmic in everyday life. To this day, fans will reference the Chores episode when something small starts spiraling out of hand. To this day, fans will reference the Dice episode when a small wish backfires. To this day, fans will reference the watch episode when a future self seems to be sending small messages back to the present. The show, by being trippy in such a consistent way, gave its audience a shared language of small, portable, surreal references that work in the real world the way the trippy episodes worked in the fictional one. That, on its own, is a strange and beautiful piece of cultural residue for a half-hour cable cartoon to leave behind. Most shows leave catchphrases. Regular Show left a worldview. If you have stayed with us this long, you have walked through, in slow, patient sequence, almost every family of trippy episode the show ever produced. You have walked through the engine, the dreams, the reality bends, the timepieces, the death episodes, the lore episodes, the cosmic recurring villains, the space arc, the finale, and a handful of small specific gems that deserved a longer look on their own terms. You have, in a sense, taken the trip the show was always inviting you to take, which is the trip through the show as a whole. The individual episodes are doors. The whole show is the long hallway, and the hallway, if you walk it slowly enough, opens, eventually, into a room that is bigger and stranger and more tender than any of the individual doors would have suggested. That is, in the end, the gift of a long-running show that took itself seriously even when nobody was asking it to. Before we close the lights, it is worth saying that one of the most generous things Regular Show ever did, for the kind of audience that watches a show like this late at night, is to be a show that you can put on without commitment. The episodes are short, the voice acting is gentle, the synthesizer score is soft, the plots are easy to follow, the cosmic moments arrive without warning and depart without ceremony. You can fall asleep during one and wake up during another, and the show will not be offended. The show was, on some level, always made to be watched the way it is being narrated to you tonight, in a low room, in low light, in a low mood, with the volume just barely loud enough to hear. That is, in a sense, the trippiest thing about the show. It was built to be a late-night companion to a tired person, and it does the job, year after year, regardless of which episode you happen to land on. The trip, in that sense, is always available. The door is always open. The hallway is always there. The cast, the writers, the animators, the composers, the voice actors, the directors, and the long unseen production team behind Regular Show built something whose surface registered as a goofy cable cartoon and whose deeper structure was something much more careful. They built a place. They built a small fictional town with a small fictional park inside a small fictional country inside a strange fictional cosmos. And they let people live there for 8 years. The people they let live there were Mordecai and Rigby and Skips and Pops and Benson and Muscleman and High Five Ghost and Margaret and CJ and Eileen, and a long quiet bench of supporting characters whose lives, by the end, were as full as the leads. And the place they built was, in the end, a generous place. It was a place where the trip was real, but the trip was not the point. The point was the people. The point was always the people. The trip was just a long, strange, beautiful method by which the show could finally say something honest about them. If you have made it this far, thank you for spending the night with us. The hour is late. Regular Show is still there, on whatever service still carries it, ready for you to revisit anytime you need a small soft door into a slightly larger universe. The cosmic, in this show, is never far. The park is still there. The friends are still there. The trip, whenever you want it, is still there. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.